All right,
Welcome. Welcome everybody once again. This is Conspiracy or Not, Here We Come. It is yet another Friday, January 20th, 2017. It's Inauguration Day. We are very, very fortunate to have with us Dr. Joseph P Farrell. And tonight we're going to be covering a lot of ground, so put your thinking caps on and strap them down very tightly. Dr. Farrell, if you are not familiar with him, is one remarkable researcher, and I'm going to read very briefly from Coast to Coast website. I hope I don't get a copyright strike from this. This is a brief biography from Coast to Coast. Dr. P Farrell is a recognized scholar whose credentials include a PhD in philosophy from the University of Oxford. His literary contribution is a veritable resume unto itself, covering such fields as Nazi Germany, sacred literature, physics, finance, the Giza pyramids, and music theory. A renowned researcher with an eye to assimilate a tremendous amount of background material, Farrell is able to condense the best scholastic research and publication and draw insightful new conclusions on controversial subjects. So, Dr. Farrell, hello, sir.
Thanks for having me on, Aaron.
And I'm joined as usual with my Canadian cohort, Ian, and as usual, we are with our regular contributing guest and co-producer who is responsible for acquiring this interview, Miss Amy. Hello, Amy and everyone.
Hello, Aaron and everyone.
Hi, guys. Thanks for joining us again.
All right.
Happy Inauguration Day. Yay.
Yeah.
Get that shot. Yay.
Okay, well, as you may recognize, we are a little bit less than professional around here, and I just want to say thank you to ISIS for having great respect for our democratic process and not causing any turmoil. They seem to respect the campaign process, and they seem to not want to bother our inauguration process. So there's that. We haven't had any false flags today, and ISIS seemed to take a hiatus while everybody was in campaign mode. What do you guys think of that?
Figures.
You mean the CIA construction?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No surprise there.
None.
Okay, so Dr. Farrell, is there anything to your biography you would like to add that I have not mentioned so far?
No, that pretty well covered it. On my own blog site, I say that I'm interested in a lot of strange stuff, so that's true. I'm kind of all over the board, but I do my best to synthesize things.
So you have also you have a PhD in patristics,
right?
And which is the study of ancient Christian writers and theology. Right. Is that correct? That's correct.
Yeah, patristics sounds like it's a very narrow degree, but in actuality, patristics, in terms of what you study, patristics actually takes you up to about 1200 to 1400 in the Eastern Church and very deeply into the Middle Ages in the Western Church. You have to know a lot of languages, Greek and Latin. Hebrew certainly helps. I concentrated mostly on the Greek side of things. You have to know a lot of philosophy as well. You have to know history of science. You have to know canon law a bit. So it's actually a very broad degree. It sounds very narrow and limiting, but it's actually like studying classical and medieval history with an emphasis on church history and church doctrine.
You also, if I'm not mistaken, I listen to an awful lot of interviews while I work and while I go about my day.
Uh-huh.
I'm sort of lucky that way with what I do, being that I work for and by myself. And you are, no doubt, you are literally my favorite person to listen to when it comes to interviews. Having a background in theology puts you sort of uniquely positioned to do the research that you're doing, yes?
Yeah, I would say that's the case. And one reason for that is that when you do theology, what you're dealing with is a lot of texts and how to interpret them and draw connections. So the training, the academic training serves me well in what I do, because I concentrate on documents, things that are out in the public record. The other thing that kind of academic thing helps one do is there's two ways, of course, to do a higher degree in academics, and one is to uncover something new and write about it, and the other way is to create a new synthesis of information, and that's kind of the tack I've been following in the books that I've been publishing.
I noticed that you also, I just finished reading your book, The Third Way, which is a phenomenal piece of work, jaw-dropping piece of work, by the way. I noticed that you footnote Anthony Sutton in there several times as well. And I mentioned to you in our pre-show interview that I actually, we purchased this computer for the purpose of, my intention was I wanted to begin writing my first book. And Anthony Sutton is someone that I'm familiar with, and I've used I've cited Anthony Sutton on a few occasions as well. So I was pleasantly surprised to see you do that there.
Well, Sutton's a major figure. He was a member of the Hoover Institute. So in other words, he was a recognized scholar. He published a book back.
And congressional lecturer.
Quite right. He published a book back in the 70s, a multi-volume work, which he later condensed into a one-volume sort of popular presentation of the American role in covertly aiding and abetting the Soviet Union through secret technology transfers and so on. And of course, this caused him to lose his fellowship at the Hoover Institute. And so he struck out on his own. He wrote a number of books, very crucial books. Trilaterals over Washington were a couple of volumes that he wrote. He's best known for his Wall Street and the Rise of series, 3 books, Wall Street and the Rise of Roosevelt, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, and Wall Street and the Rise of the Bolsheviks. And again, that was a series of books documenting Wall Street connections to the rise of Bolshevism in Russia, the New Deal experiment under Franklin Roosevelt, and then, of course, Adolf Hitler. So yeah, he became quite popular in what we would now call the alternative research field, because he was an academic. He footnoted extensively. He argued his case. So he became very unpopular too in certain circles.
No doubt. No doubt. He was exposing quite a lot of things, and if I'm not mistaken, he also spoke a lot about Skull and Bones.
Yes. He wrote that's probably his best known book. He wrote a book called America's Secret Establishment, all about Skull and Bones. That was based on notebooks that were given to him from Charlotte Iserbyt Thompson, who herself went on to write a book. She was in the Reagan Department of Education for a brief period. She went on to write a lengthy book about American education, the influence of progressivism in American education. So, and her father was a member of Skull and Bones, and this is how Anthony Sutton came by all the information that he came by. So yeah, there's a link between these two individuals, very definite, close link.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. Okay, tonight I want to, we're going to try to tell a really, really huge story tonight. Involving a lot of people, a lot of events, agendas, places, moments in time, going back quite a long way, and in some cases, quite possibly going back to ancient times. One of the places I think I would like to start with you is in your book, The Third Way, which I'm holding in my hand here, and I would also like to show you how many individual Post-it note personal little miniature notes that I have sticking to. There's literally probably a good 45 to 50 of these things sticking out of this book. Phenomenal book, by the way. Absolutely phenomenal book. Amazing piece of work. You begin the book and you talk a lot about the Madrid Circular, which is, I think, probably a good place to start.
Yes. Well, the Madrid Circular is a document that I want to stress something right off the bat. The document has no provenance. It appears only in a book that was written in the 1950s by a German-American emigre that came to this country having fled Nazi Germany by the name of T.H. Tatens. And he wrote 2 books in the early 1950s. Germany, I forget what the exact title is, Germany colludes with the Kremlin, or Germany plots with the Kremlin, and another book. And in these books, he gives you the entire Madrid Circular. The Madrid Circular purports to be a document that was composed by the German Geopolitical Center in Madrid, Spain, in the early 1950s. And in that document, the post-war Nazi group outlines its strategy, its long-term strategy with the outbreak of the Korean War, for how it is going to play America and the Soviet Union off against each other for the express purpose of creating maneuvering room for West Germany. All right. And the interesting thing about that circular, and the way I argue in the book, is if the document is genuine, then you should expect to see actual real policy implementation that mirrors the document. The document goes on to say that this post-war group of Nazis will use its influence inside of America to position very carefully, to position its personnel assets in key positions in post-war Europe. And it also reveals the fact that a European federation is essentially their plan, because a European federation would be easily dominated by Germany, by far and away, economically and therefore politically. So in other words, their goal is basically to conquer Europe through economic means. And that's kind of my jumping off point in the book, because if you look at wartime plans for the creation of a European federation, this was actually something that was worked out in detail in a 1942 publication that appeared inside of Nazi Germany. It was a study, actually, that was sponsored by the Reichsbank and by IG Farben. And it was a very lengthy study. Several German experts and so on were called in to figure out how they would create a European customs and currency union, with the Reichsmark being the currency to peg other national currencies against it in a narrow fluctuation band. Well, again, curiously enough, in the late 1980s, such a structure was indeed put into place by West Germany when the national currencies of the Netherlands, Denmark, Austria, and then eventually what would become the Czech Republic after the collapse of the Warsaw Pact were all pegged to the Deutschmark within certain narrow fluctuation values. And when the national currencies would stray outside those values, it would be the German Bundesbank that would come in and either buy the currency or sell the currency to bring it back within those exchange rates. So in other words, the mechanism that was put into place and that ultimately became the basis now for the euro was this currency mechanism that was talked about way back in 1942. So in other words, point by point, you can look at this Nazi plan for the European Union and see exactly what was put into place. So that's kind of the way I start out, as far as I'm concerned, given the fact that you see so many of the policies talked about in the Madrid Circular implemented.
Remarkably prescient.
Yeah, it is remarkably prescient. And the other thing I want to mention that's very unusual, that you find nowhere else other than in the Madrid Circular, is the Madrid Circular talks very explicitly that the July bomb plot against Adolf Hitler on July 20th, 1944, Operation Valkyrie, the Tom Cruise movie.
Right.
One of the things that the Madrid Circular mentions very specifically is that this was used by the Nazis as a crisis of opportunity when they supposedly executed a number of the plotters, and
right.
they did this to create new identities for them and get them out of Europe at the end of World War II to continue the existence of the Nazi Party. So,
right.
you know, in my books, this is something that people have to be aware of. In my books dealing with the Nazis, I've been arguing a case through many books that what was put into place at the end of World War II is what I call a Nazi international. It is quite literally an extraterritorial state with very, very deep pockets and very, very close alliances with the big German multinational corporations and so on and so forth. So in other words, if you look at the thing whole, what you see the Madrid Circular talking about is the survival of this extraterritorial state at the end of World War II.
Right. The Madrid Circular also points out a few key points that raised a few red flags for me. Was also that they had intentions to create basically, for lack of a better term, a strategy of tension,
yes,
which harkens to the Gladio stay-behind army that we discussed last week with Ole Demigard. As I was reading this book, that's all I could think about. Every time I saw that part, it just reminded me of this entire Gladio network and the strategy of tension, where they had plans to pit the United States, essentially the capitalist West, against the communist East,
right,
to the point of war, literally, if necessary.
Yeah, we just saw this happen, in this last election. Hillary. There was concern in the United States that Hillary represented a pro-war party. And I want to go to Operation Gladio because most people don't realize what the historical basis for Operation Gladio is, the stay-behind units. This was the strategy of the Nazi general Reinhard Gehlen, who headed German military intelligence on the Eastern Front from 1942 up till the end of the war. That organization was called Fremde Heere Ost, Foreign Armies East. It was the German military intelligence unit for all of Eastern Europe and for the Soviet Union. It was a huge network. And part of that network and part of his plan at the end of the war was to create exilee groups, Belarusian groups, various groups in the Baltic states, Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, as stay-behind guerrilla organizations in Eastern Europe. So in other words, the plan comes once again out of Nazi military intelligence and strategic planning, which is extended then to the rest of Europe via the NATO Gladio operation. So in other words, you've got a Nazi influence going on even there. And of course, Gehlen, it's very important for people to remember that Gehlen approached American intelligence at the end of World War II via the American Army General Siebert, who in turn was kind of the go-between between Gehlen and Allen Dulles. And the agreement that Gehlen struck was, okay, you guys are going to need intelligence about the communists, and we're interested in fighting the communists. So keep my whole organization intact. We'll put it under American control, and you fund it out of American tax dollars. So in other words, it's very important for people to understand that when the CIA is signed into law, is created by President Truman in the National Security Act of 1947, that the human on-the-ground intelligence network that the CIA was Gehlen's organization. It was a group of Nazis, in other words, and that becomes the CIA Foreign Soviet Desk. Now, let's go further.
Yeah.
There is a book out by Christopher Simpson called Blowback, an excellent book. I urge your listeners and watchers to get a hold of that book and read it. It's a stunning book. And he talks about the influence of Gehlen's organization, which incidentally, I want to point out, is the historical basis, the organization that's then rolled into West German intelligence when West Germany is granted sovereignty in 1949. So in other words, the modern German Bundesnachrichtendienst, the modern German CIA, is essentially founded on a Nazi organization, all right? So Simpson points out something very interesting. In the early years of the operation of the CIA, and I think this probably extends all the way up to the early period of the Eisenhower administration. In the early period of the operation of the CIA, Gehlen's intelligence reports and analyses were often taken by the CIA and simply retyped on CIA stationery and handed without further comment to President Truman. Now stop and think about that, folks. What that means is you have a Nazi general briefing the American president.
God, I love it.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? So yeah, you know, it kind of looks like the Madrid Circular may have a few points going for it, you know, even though it doesn't have any provenance. So yeah, I tend to think that this whole thing is another clue that you're looking at a huge post-war Nazi organization that's maneuvering and shifting and shaping things behind the scenes.
Well, it's no secret, most of the people listening to this show and most of the people who may or may not be, you know, conspiracy minded are very aware of Project Paperclip.
Right.
You know, we started NASA with
Right.
Werner von Braun, and we brought all the Nazi scientists over here.
Right.
It's also pretty well known that the CIA was turned from the OSS to the CIA
Right.
using Nazi intelligence and Nazi intelligent officers.
Right.
I would suspect, and I don't know this, but maybe you could fill in the blank, we also have the NSA.
Right.
And you also suggest that the Bilderberg Conference is a creation of the Nazis. And in your book also, and I know I'm laying a lot on your plate all at once, you also go through the evidence that this global jihad network
Yes.
that we're all living with right now, otherwise known as terrorism and ISIS, was
Right.
also a creation of the Nazis.
Yes. Yeah, you've laid a lot on my plate. So let's take
So where's the Nazi CIA connection? Like where did it start?
with Galen, with
Started
General
with Galen.
Galen. With Galen in the agreement
Yeah.
that he struck at the end of World War II. And if you read Galen's memoirs, the general was a spy. That he published his memoirs after he had retired in the 1970s, and he was given a big banquet in Washington D.C. You know,
Oh, jeez.
so yeah, you know, this guy was a real piece of work. But yeah, it starts then. And in the agreement, Galen actually summarizes the agreement that was struck with American intelligence. And there's 6 points to it. And the very last point is, it is understood that if there should be a conflict of interest between American interests and German interests, well, obviously, my organization is going to protect German interests first, you know. So it's right there, you know. So we made a deal, a Faustian deal with the devil. But let's go to the Bilderberg group, because this is a crucial part of the story that people don't get.
Sure.
I've been arguing for many years and in a number of books that financial analysis in the West is always wrong because it's missing about 50% of the picture. And, you know, Catherine Austin Fitts came to the same conclusion via a very, very different route with her experiences in HUD. But there is a hidden system of finance. And by this, I mean that we're dealing with something that is so black, it's not even the black budget. It is a completely off the books system of finance to create a political slush fund to fight communism using Axis loot. And by Axis, I mean principally Nazi loot and Japanese loot. All right.
Japanese loot. I
And
wanted to ask you
Japanese
about both of those.
Yeah, well, we're getting to that.
Certainly.
The Bilderberg group, it looks to me, and I'm skipping over gobs of details that are there.
No,
in
that's
the
okay.
books.
Tonight we want to do pretty much an overview, and
Yeah,
I
we're
can't wait
doing-
to have you back, and we can go into more detail on any one of these topics and lay out a more detailed.
Right, we're doing the Cliff Notes version tonight, folks.
Right,
So,
right, because this is a big story.
it is a huge story. The Bilderberg group looks to me like it was founded for the express purpose to coordinate the movement of all of these Axis funds into the Western banking system, where it would be used as a hidden reserve, in other words, kept completely off the books, and then moved back into Europe. All right. And if you're going to do that, it's interesting, if you look at the first attendees at those early Bilderberger meetings, who do you have? Well, you have Lawrence and David Rockefeller, of course, pushing for the creation of this group. You have the Rothschilds in Great Britain and France doing the same thing. But on the European side of that equation, who do you have? Well, you have Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who is a minor German nobleman and who occupied a kind of middle management position in, guess who? Our good friends, I.G. Farben. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, oh, wow. And then on top of this, one of the consistent early attendees at these Bilderberg meetings was always a fellow by the name of Dr. Hermann Joseph Ops, ABS. So who's Dr. Hermann Joseph Ops? Well, Dr. Hermann Joseph Ops at the time was the CEO of Deutsche Bank, all right? And in addition to this, during the war, Dr. Ops was the head of a handling bank in Berlin that was the bank of accounts for the Reich government. In other words, it had the same position vis-a-vis the German government that the New York Federal Reserve has in the United States.
It was the German central bank.
It was, well, it wasn't the German central bank. It was the bank of accounts managing the German government's accounts. That's what the New York Federal Reserve does, all right? This little handling bank, in other words, that Dr. Ops was the head of, is the guy writing the salary for Adolf Hitler as Reichskanzler. This is the guy signing his check. So in other words, we've got a very clear Nazi influence in those very early Bilderberg meetings, and it's steady and persistent. Now, why is this important to the story of the CIA? Well, after Truman creates the CIA and NSA in the National Security Act in September of 1947, Truman was also then briefed by, here it comes, Captain Ed Lansdale, later General Ed Lansdale. That should be a name familiar to all of you JFK assassination researchers. Ed Lansdale was told by General MacArthur to go all the way from Tokyo to Washington, D.C. to brief President Truman on the existence of vast amounts of Japanese gold, silver, platinum, liquid cash, art treasures that the Japanese had scoured East Asia for during their occupation during World War II. In other words, it's a huge pile of loot, all right?
Today's dollars, probably hundreds of billions or trillions.
Billions of dollars of loot, all right? So Lansdale flies to Washington, D.C., and he briefs President Truman. And Truman takes the decision to recover these funds, to keep them completely off the books and use them as a covert political operations slush fund. So, and puts it under the control and jurisdiction of the National Security Council. So in other words, bang, right there, you have President Truman has put the American intelligence community in the banking business. And it's a huge system that is totally free from any oversight of Congress. In other words, this ain't the black budget, folks. This is
this is above and beyond the black budget.
Precisely. This is a huge system of finance. All right. Now,
sorry, was that Walter Bedell Smith? That was the man that was. He was in charge at that time, wasn't he?
Well, Bedell Smith was in charge, occupied a high place in the CIA. You had him, you had Rear Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter. This was before the Dulles influence in the CIA under Eisenhower. Again, Sullivan and Cromwell here, folks. And that's another part of the story. You know, we've got John J. McCloy as part of the Sullivan and Cromwell crowd after World War II. John J. McCloy, again, just to let people know who this joker is. He's a lawyer, but guess what? Guess who he's a lawyer for before World War II? I.G. Farben. Okay.
Right.
And then
he's the American lawyer for I.G. Farben.
He's the American lawyer for I.G. Farben. After World War II, what does he become? Well, he becomes the American High Commissioner for West Germany, pardons 70,000 Nazis, many of whom end up in Chancellor Konrad Adenauer's cabinet. And then, lo and behold, you find him as a Warren commissioner after the assassination.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Geez.
Yeah. So in other words, lo and behold. So yeah, there's a Nazi story here, folks, that people don't want to wrap their minds around.
Dulles was the go-between who also was on the Warren Commission.
Yes, Dulles was the go-between with Galen's outfit, who was also on the Warren Commission. Curious thing, after Kennedy had fired him after the Bay of Pigs. So, you know, to kind of put this all in a nice tidy package with a bow on it, I've always thought that when President Eisenhower left office, I'm old enough to remember, I was a little boy, I was watching television, and here's this old bald guy on television interrupting my favorite commercials and, you know, giving his now famous military-industrial complex speech. I've always thought that he was warning not simply about the American military-industrial complex. I have always thought that he was warning about this surviving Nazi thing and all of its influence. I think he was doing both, quite frankly. So yeah, you know, President Kennedy comes along and says, I'm going to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Well, if you're Galen and these Nazis, that threatens your cover. You know, that's
big time.
Big time, yes. So, you know, we can go on and on, guys.
Oh yeah, it's just a giant circle. So regarding Dulles, who was, you know, head of the CIA and who was the CIA being created and completely overrun and infiltrated with Nazis, it's no surprise.
Right. It's no surprise. You know, we can kind of look to the Kennedy assassination to see symbols of something that most assassination researchers don't want to deal with, and that is precisely the Axis connection to it. Because let's recall that on the day of the assassination, if you look at the news reports, there's an excellent documentary out there called Evidence of Revision that's just nothing but a compilation of the news reports on American television as they were happening. Well, you sit there and you watch CBS News, you watch Roger Mudd and Dan Schiffer and Walter Cronkite and all these guys talking about, well, they've recovered the murder weapon and it's a 7.65 Mauser. And then later in the day, oh, by the way, we made a mistake. Apparently, the rifle that's recovered is a 6.5 Mannlicher Carchanto, and Cronkite actually mispronounces it. All right. Well, you know, stop and ask yourself a question. Did the German army ever use a 7.65 Mauser? No, it didn't. That Mauser was a special weapon that was produced by the German firm for guess who? Argentina. Oh, you know, you know.
What a coincidence, right?
Yeah, but it's just another one of those curious coincidences. So yeah, I use that as kind of a symbol, a symbolic message. You've got two weapons from two former Axis powers that are being fingered.
Regarding the not to the JFK assassination, I'd seen the Zapruder film where it shows that guy standing there doing a Nazi salute on the sidewalk as the car goes by.
Yep.
So I'm under the impression that it was mind control. It was MK Ultra triggers. All these things, they were hypnotized previously.
Perhaps.
And as soon as people in the car or around saw these things, they acted accordingly.
Perhaps,
right?
It could be. It could be.
So it just brings to mind the Nazi, you know, when you mentioned the JFK and the, you know, that's one small piece right there as well, right?
Oh yeah,
right?
There are huge, if you are willing to look at them, there are huge Nazi footprints all over the JFK assassination. Let me give you an example. Let's go back to General Galen and the agreement with Allen Dulles. Okay, so 1963, General Galen is still in charge of the Bundesnachrichtendienst in West Germany. So in other words, he's in charge of basically the whole Gladio thing, okay? And President Kennedy gets assassinated. Well, let's look at Lee Harvey Oswald and a fellow by the name of George de Mohrenschildt, all right? George de Mohrenschildt was a German-Russian, Belarusian from Moisir in Belarusia. Where does Lee Harvey Oswald end up? Well, he ends up in Belarusia, in Minsk, all right, after he...
And he spoke such good
Right.
Russian that his Russian wife didn't know.
Didn't know that he wasn't
Yeah.
Russian. Right. Okay. Now, he was for a time at Atsugi Air Force Base in Japan as a radar operator for the U-2 flights. All right. The Warren Commission uncovered that his Marine buddies not only heard Oswald learning and speaking Russian, but guess what other language he was learning? German. German.
German.
When Oswald's address book is found after the assassination, guess whose name is in it? George Lincoln Rockwell, president of the American Nazi Party. Now, most assassination researchers will tell you that, well, Oswald got out of the Soviet Union with some money and with the daughter of a Soviet GRU, military intelligence colonel, in tow as his wife. Virtually impossible to do in the Soviet Union at that day. So in other words, he's got intelligence running him. And most JFK assassination researchers point out the documents connecting him to the CIA and FBI and conclude, well, it's the CIA running him over there. But let's remember who the human on the ground intelligence is for the CIA in the Soviet Union at that time. It's General Galen. It's his outfit. So when you tie him with George de Mohrenschildt, who's introducing Oswald to the white Russian community in Dallas, he's also introducing Oswald. Guess what? George de Mohrenschildt's an oil geologist, guys. So he's introducing Oswald to the Murchisons and the Hunts, the big Texas oil men, who have their own reasons to hate Kennedy. And now the real cherry on this sundae is, if you look at the research of Professor Peter Dale Scott, who's done just an enormous amount of yeoman's work on the American deep state and its role in the Kennedy assassination, Professor Scott points out that the Texas oilmen appeared to have had some sort of private intelligence operation, some private intelligence network. Guess whose it was? It was General Galen.
Galen's.
Yeah. So the Texas oilmen have a direct intelligence pipeline to West German intelligence, which under Galen, like it or not, it's a Nazi intelligence organization. So in other words, if you bother to look, you've got all of these little indicators that, yeah, besides pissed off Cubans and a pissed off American intelligence community, pissed off central bankers because Kennedy's bypassed the Federal Reserve, you also have a bunch of Nazis thrown into the mix along with the mafia and everybody else. So yeah, you know, this is a huge story, folks, and I know it sounds ridiculous and like a bad Hollywood B movie, but I can assure you the dots are there to connect.
No doubt. No doubt. Now, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ian.
Now, the Bushes had a hand in
You're breaking up, buddy.
Germany.
Say again, please.
Oh, no, the Bushes, they had a direct hand in funneling money through a German company directly to the Nazi Party, right?
Yes. Do I know anything about that? Yeah.
Yeah. Could you just elaborate on that?
Sure. Senator Prescott Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush's father. Prescott Bush, during World War II, headed a bank called the Union Bank and Trust Company. Franklin Roosevelt put it on the enemies list and closed it down because it was still conducting business with Nazi Germany after the American declaration of war and after the Nazi declaration of war on us. They were doing business with Nazi Germany for 6 months after the declaration. Well, anyway, the Union Bank and Trust had as a hidden partner one Fritz Thiessen. Okay, Fritz Thiessen was the big German steel magnate that headed Vereinigte Stahlwerke inside of Nazi Germany and was an early financier to Adolf Hitler when Hitler was running his political campaigns to be elected chancellor. Okay, so in other words, you've got Bush, Fritz Thiessen, Adolf Hitler as a chain of financial flow from the United States to Germany and to Hitler's campaign coffers. So yeah, you know, you've got all of these things. And Thiessen, it's important to remember that Thiessen was later put into to a concentration camp for a few months because he broke with Hitler. And I've always suspected, because if you look at Thyssen now, today, Thyssen is still a gigantic company. It merged with Krupp. So now you've got the German firm of Thyssen-Krupp. You know, they build elevators over here. You can see their little trucks driving around.
I knew that name. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Fritz Thyssen, I think, may be one of these characters, just like the Madrid Circular suggested, that was put into prison for the express purpose of sanitizing their record in the post-war era. You know, well, look at me. You know, I actually opposed the Nazis. I broke with the Nazis. I served time. You know,
Right.
under Adolf Hitler. So yeah, you know, it's a huge story, folks.
Okay, you're one of the few, if the only person that I'm aware of that ties together this, and you call it a mafia-style covert war, basically between the Nazis, basically who are in the middle between the communist East and the American capitalist West.
Right.
And as I mentioned to you before in the beginning of the show, I'm holding in my hand some literature from Myron Fagan, and this goes back to the early 1920s. This piece was written in 1964, and if you don't mind, I would like to read a passage or two from here.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, this is chapter 2. It says, first of all, I wish to stress that this is not my first warning to the American people that Hollywood, radio, TV are the craftiest, most brazen, most poisonous, most dangerous carriers of communist propaganda of all our mass communications media.
Mm-hmm.
And further, on the following page here, and I'm just going to jump down in the middle of this paragraph, he says, I did not have the slightest suspicions that many of my close friends and colleagues and associates were as deep in the commission of treason as Alger Hiss, which is a name I recognize from your recent book.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is the guy who was actually convicted. Is that correct? He was convicted as a communist?
Well, he was not convicted for espionage. He was actually convicted for perjury, for lying to the House Un-American Activities Committee. That was the committee that got Richard Nixon his start, because, of course, Richard Nixon brought in Whittaker Chambers, who had been claimed to have been a member of Hiss's communist cell. All right. And Hiss was convicted subsequently for perjury, for lying to that committee. There are still people in this country to this day that think he was innocent. But the problem is, with the declassification recently of the Venona transcripts, Hiss is clearly mentioned in there with a Soviet code name. All right. So Hiss was part of that very left-wing group of experts that Franklin Roosevelt brought into power when he assumed power in the United States, that were persistent throughout the Roosevelt administration. And there's so much going on here in the background that looks very suspicious when you look at it with alternative kind of conspiracy spectacles, because Roosevelt, of course, had Henry Wallace as vice president, who was dropped in his 1944 race and substituted by Harry Truman, you know, this Democrat senator from Missouri that was kind of a nobody, you know, KKK member and all of this stuff. So there's definitely this kind of lurch to the right in the last Roosevelt administration. But the thing here that interests me, that I mentioned in the third way, I spent a whole chapter on Senator Joseph McCarthy, just to get people to think a bit and drop the propaganda that they've been spoon-fed, that, you know, this guy is some sort of diabolical Machiavellian evil genius monster. He's certainly a shameless opportunist. I mean, I think that's very clear, but nonetheless, you have the McCarthy Committee in the 1950s. But what interests me is there are all of these committees after World War II investigating some aspect of penetration of the American federal government. You know, McCarthy's the most famous or infamous. Right. You have the Kefauver Committee investigating the penetration of the mafia and its influence in the federal government. You've got the House Un-American Activities Committee. You've got the Reese Committee in the House investigating the American corporate foundations, Ford and Rockefeller, and their influence on American policy. You've got all of these committees, and no one has sat down to look at them whole. But there's one key ingredient that kind of connects these dots, okay? Most people don't know that the young Robert Kennedy was an assistant junior counsel on Senator McCarthy's committee. And he had been put there by his father, Joseph Kennedy, who was a close friend of Senator McCarthy. In fact, Joe Kennedy wanted Bobby Kennedy to be McCarthy's chief counsel, all right? And Robert Kennedy was a close friend of Senator McCarthy to such an extent
that he secretly attended his funeral.
Secretly attended Senator McCarthy's funeral when McCarthy died. He secretly,
See, I did read your book.
Yeah, he secretly flew to Appleton, Wisconsin to attend Senator McCarthy's funeral. And, you know, that gets omitted from most history books because they don't want to go there. The other key thing is that John Kennedy, when he's the junior senator from Massachusetts, along with his brother Bobby,
is the only one who didn't show up for the censure.
Hang on, I'm not there yet. He's
okay.
also a member of the Kefauver Committee investigating the mob. We've all seen those newsreels of John Kennedy grilling Jimmy Hoffa, you know,
sure.
in front of the Kefauver Committee. And like you say, when Joseph McCarthy comes up for a censure vote in the United States Senate after the Army McCarthy hearings, you know, a clear example of McCarthy's, you know, opportunism, his shameless opportunism, because that was a disaster for him. It really was. He never recovered from it. But John Kennedy, when the Senate voted, was the only Democrat not to vote for the censure. Why? Because he was conveniently absent with a back problem. And, you know, he bobbed and weaved for years until Eleanor Roosevelt, you know, who still had a lot of clout in the Democratic National Committee, finally forced him to say, well, yeah, you know, this was years later. Had I been there, I would have voted for the censure. But even then, John Kennedy goes on to say, but I was clearly not opposed to McCarthy's investigation of communists in the government. So in other words, the key here is you've got all of these committees. No one has yet sat down to view them whole and say, well, why do we have all of these committees suddenly investigating all of these different aspects of penetration of the federal government, number one. And number two, why are the Kennedys in the thick of it? You know?
Yeah, no kidding.
So my hypothesis at the moment, and again, I want to caution your listeners and your viewers, I have no evidence for this. It's simply a hypothesis based on intuition. That what you see going on with all of these committees is a bit of factional warfare going on in the American deep state. You've got the Nazi faction represented by American intelligence that wants to expose the communists. You've got the communist faction that wants to expose the Nazis. So yeah,
and
there's
neither one wants the whole game exposed to the public.
Right. Neither one wants the whole thing exposed. Right. Exactly.
All right. So is it safe to say that the political left in this country would be communist and the political right in this country would be Nazi?
Well, no, I don't. You know, I obviously don't think that your average Democrat is a communist.
Well, no. I don't mean the average person on the street. I mean in principle.
No, I don't think even in principle that they are. What I do maintain is that they are influential in the policy formation of the American deep state. So in other words, the schism, the way I'm looking at it, Aaron, is that the schism that I suspect might be going on behind the scenes in the post-war period, where Truman's coming into office and he's inherited all of these massive security risks from the Roosevelt administration, to the point that he himself institutes his loyalty review board. Let's remember, that's how McCarthy gets his start. He's not saying, I have a list. This is the list that the Truman administration itself had provided. Okay, that's how all of this gets started.
Now,
so
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let me finish. The Truman administration is inheriting all of this security risk from Roosevelt. Okay, So what I suspect is if you have factional infighting between certain elements of the American deep state that was going on, that began to evidence itself in the final administration of Franklin Roosevelt, carried on over into the administration of Harry Truman, and then ultimately on into the first administration of Dwight Eisenhower, what you see there is the same thing that we saw just happen in this last election. You saw elements of the American deep state backing Hillary Clinton. You had elements of the American deep state backing Donald Trump. So in other words, there's a big, huge fissure that's been festering for about 70 years. I view this whole period of history as one long thing, and internecine fighting between the two. That's the way I view it.
That's the paradigm that I'm beginning to take on, especially after reading your book, following your work, and doing what I can to follow politics, and including world geopolitics as well.
Right.
Now, remind me, when exactly did McCarthy get his start?
All right, Senator McCarthy.
Just roughly, what year? I'll have another question follow up.
1950, when he gave
50.
that
Okay,
that speech at Wheeling, West Virginia, to the Women's Republican Club in Wheeling, West Virginia.
The reason I ask is because this Myron Fagan that I have read, this goes back, his writing and his exposure of the communist infiltration goes back to the very early 1900s.
Right.
And Myron Fagan is actually responsible for bringing not one but two congressional hearings on the communist infiltration of Hollywood.
Right. Right.
And he's been writing about the communist infiltration of Hollywood since the early 40s.
Right. But it's very important to remember that Senator McCarthy's committee, he gets tarred with that brush a lot. But in point of fact, Senator McCarthy's committee, the subcommittee on government operations, was never investigating Hollywood. He was solely concentrated on the security risks within the government and making the federal government abide by Truman's own loyalty oath requirements. All right, that was his focus. He got tarred with a lot of things. And again, I'm not saying that he wasn't a shameless opportunist. He was. But he got tarred with a lot of things that he really didn't even do.
Right.
So those committees are elsewhere in all of this. I'm
only suggesting that the idea of communist infiltration, certainly didn't start with McCarthy.
Oh no, it didn't. Absolutely.
I mean, like I said, Fagan was responsible for bringing two congressional hearings on communist infiltration.
Right, and you had the House Un-American Activities Committee, which was started by the Democratic majority in the last administration of Franklin Roosevelt. They're the ones that set that up, because it was very clear even then that you've got a lot of people in and around Franklin Roosevelt in very high positions that were very, very, what we would now consider radically left. And the Venona transcripts have since come out and verified that a lot of these people did indeed have some direct connection with Soviet intelligence during World War II. So, this is a story that has revived itself simply because of the publication of those transcripts, the declassification of them very, very recently.
Okay, very good. Well, we are minutes away from our 1 hour break. And as I said before in the pre-show, what I'm going to do for our break this time, I'm not going to play the standard JFK Secret Society speech. I think people might be getting a little bit tired of that, although I could hear it 100 more times. We have a friend and fan of the show, probably listening right now. Forgive me, I'm not watching the chat box. But his name is Zach. His YouTube channel is Juxtapose. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play some of his music. What he does is he creates music and he posts it online on his YouTube channel. So we're going to take about a 2 minute 45-second break, and I'm going to play some of Zach's music for that. And in the meantime, I want to remind everybody who's watching right now and listening to our show, if you have any questions for our guest, that we run our show the way Carrie Cassidy does, that if you have a question, please put it in all capital letters, because Ian and Amy are keeping an eye on the chat box, and I, on rare occasions, will be looking at the chat box. So if you have any questions, put your questions in all capital letters to make it easy for us to identify, and we'll try to get to your questions as soon as possible. Ian, Amy, do you guys have any final questions before we go to break?
Sorry about that. I'm just kind of stunned listening to all of this stuff. I don't know that I have any questions so much as I want to hear more.
So we know that Albert Pike wrote his writings about having the First World War, the Second World War, and the
Right.
Third, to create a new world order, right? That was the ultimate goal, order out of chaos, right?
Right.
So we've got this guy here. I was looking up Monet last night, right? And he's basically had his hand in creating and funding. Like he had a company that provided war materials, right? And he basically formed what was called the League of Nations after the First World War, and then he had a hand in creating this European Federation,
Right.
I should say. So I just wanted to read this passage here that he said, okay? And basically it's the Hegelian dialectic, right, of the problem, reaction, solution scenario. Because after World War II, France was very financially struck, right? And Germany was basically being not sanctioned, but more or less being punished for their role, right? And they're trying to funnel money to France, right, to boost France, right? So he says, through the consolidation of basic production and the institution of a new high authority, whose decisions will bind France, Germany, and the other countries that join, this proposal represents the first concrete step towards a European federation, imperative for the preservation of peace. Okay. So basically, this whole, my question is that when did Nazism basically start? Like, do you know, like, how long ago this same group of people had started this plan?
All right. Those are two separate questions.
The Nazis.
Those are two separate questions. Nazism, the party, gets started, I think, in 1921 out of the German Workers' Party, which is formed out of a movement of German veterans coming back from World War I called the Freikorps movement. All right, the Free Corps movement. Basically, these were a bunch of paramilitary veterans running around Germany, particularly in Bavaria, that were extraordinarily dissatisfied with, obviously, with the Versailles system, and wanted to put into power a government that would overturn it. All right. So in other words, the resistance to the Versailles system begins not with the Nazis per se, but under the Weimar Republic with the formation of the German Workers' Party. Adolf Hitler is tapped by the German General Staff, by Colonel General Hans von Seeckt himself, who was the chief staff officer of Field Marshal von Mackensen during World War I, you know, a very famous German field marshal. He was tapped to be a spy for the German General Staff and infiltrate the German Workers' Party to spy on it. And so Hitler, you know, begins as a spy in the Nazi Party and eventually simply takes it over and changes the name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Okay, that's literally how it begins. As far as the second part of your question, I don't recall the second part of it. So help me there.
Well, I'm interested in finding out what the relationship with the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements.
Yeah, that's a whole. We're going to have to get that one on the.
Yeah, well, let's take that one. Let's take that one on the flip side. Let's take that out after the break.
All right.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. We're only 2 minutes away. Let's go ahead and call it break time. And I'm going to give me just a second. What I want to do is I want to do a quick screen share so that I can share Zach's. And I'm not exactly prepared at this. Just give me one moment here, and I want to pull up Zach's channel, and just so that he gets credit for all the music here. And see, it's JUXTPOSE. It's juxtapose. So for anybody listening, what we're doing here is, oops, did I type it wrong? Yeah, I did. Pardon me, everyone. Juxtapose. There he is. I want to make sure that Zach gets credit for this because we're going to play a little bit of Zach's music here, and we're going to take roughly a 3-minute break. It's about 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and this song is called Subduster. So we'll be back in about 2 minutes and 45 seconds, everybody. All right, and there we are. That was Zach's music. That was Subduster. Hope you appreciate that one, Zach. That one's for you, buddy. And we are back with Dr. Joseph Farrell. And the question was posed. We are now going to move to the Bank of International Settlements, which was set up by the Nazis to create a clearinghouse for the war reparations after World War II. So, Dr. Farrell, you can just go ahead and tell us all about the BIS.
Well, the BIS, just one minor correction, the BIS was not set up by the Nazis. They were not in power when the BIS was actually established. But the Bank of International Settlements was the brainchild of one Hjalmar Horace Greeley Schacht. This was a German American whose parents had emigrated from Germany to the United States. He was born in this country, hence his 2 American middle names. And then he immigrated back to Germany, and he became kind of the financial wizard under the Weimar Republic as president of the Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, during the interwar period, because he put an end to the hyperinflation. Much of that was being caused by currency speculators at the time. Think of George Soros. And he put an absolute end to it. He pulled a fast one on them, essentially, and restabilized the Reichsmark. And then as the interwar period proceeded with the onerous war reparations payments of the Treaty of Versailles, there were 2 American plans that were created by members of the American corporate elite. They're called the Young and the Dawes Plan. And what these did was they renegotiated the actual war reparations, scaled the payments down, And Schacht came up with the idea to create a central bank of central banks, now called the Bank of International Settlements, that would be the bank of accounts for handling these war reparation payments. And he proposed this idea for this bank to his close friends, George Strong in the New York Federal Reserve, and Montague Norman, who was the head of the Bank of England at the time. And they all agreed this is just a wonderful idea. So they chartered the Bank of International Settlements, and it's important for people to understand that the Bank of International Settlements is a sovereign territory. In other words, it's a bank with international sovereignty. It has its own diplomatic pouches. The Swiss authorities are not allowed to enter the bank without permission from the bank. So in other words, it's like a kind of a banking version of the Vatican City state, all right? Now, what is true about the Nazis and the Bank of International Settlements is that Schacht, who goes on to become Hitler's central banker for a brief period during the early years of the Nazi regime, you can see pictures of Hjalmar Schacht marching right next to Hitler, you know, in several pictures. Schacht was able to use the Bank of International Settlements and place many Nazi bankers on the board of the Bank of International Settlements during the war. People like the Gestapo General Kurt Schrader, who has also had a banking house in Cologne, Germany. Hermann Schmitz, the head of IG Farben, sat on the bank's board of directors during the war. And the president during the war was an American by the name of William McKittrick, all right? Now, this is crucial, because William McKittrick, as the American president of the Bank of International Settlements, all through the war, even though he's American, in other words, a citizen of an enemy combatant, he was able to travel all over Axis Europe under diplomatic passport, you know, and they rolled out the red carpet in fascist Italy. They rolled out the red carpet in Nazi Germany for this American banker who's heading the Bank of International Settlements. Well, why is that important? Because McKittrick, in turn, was a close friend of Allen Dulles and the whole Sullivan and Cromwell crowd.
What about Walther Funk? Where does he come into that?
Hang on. Let me get there. Let me stay on this story because this is crucial.
Sorry.
The McKittrick, Dulles, Sullivan, and Cromwell crowd were that part of the American deep state that were trying, through the Bank of International Settlements and other fronts, to negotiate a separate peace with Nazi Germany and shut down the war in the West to allow the Germans to transfer, 80 plus divisions that they had on the Western Front back to the Eastern Front and take out the Soviet Union. And Franklin Roosevelt and his advisors got wind of this, of course, and shut that whole thing down. But that's part of the backdrop that you must bear in mind for the bomb plot against Adolf Hitler in July of 1944, because the Germans that are participating in that bomb plot are people with connections to that, business connections to that group of American financiers and corporatists, all right? So you've got something going on both sides of the war here in the same context. Now, Walter Funk Adolf Hitler replaced Hjalmar Schacht as president of the Reichsbank with Walter Funk, all right? So Walter Funk becomes president of the Reichsbank. He also has a connection to the Bank of International Settlements. And Walter Funk is the man who chaired that IG Farben Reichsbank study in 1942 on how to create a European federation, all right? And there's basically two steps in that creation that we need to remember. The first one I've already alluded to, and that was they wanted to create a currency exchange rate mechanism where the national currencies of other countries in German-occupied Europe would be pegged to an exchange rate fluctuation mechanism to the German Reichsmark, all right? And that's the system that we saw emerge after the war 3 decades later under Helmut Schmidt, okay? When you had Denmark, Holland, Austria, Luxembourg, even Belgium at one point, had their currencies pegged to the German D-Mark and to the German Bundesbank, to the German central bank. The euro got started when France joined that system. Okay, so in other words, France kind of capitulated at that point. That's Walter Funk. So the first plank was the creation of this exchange rate mechanism in the Reichsbank 1942 study. The second plank was to create a bureaucratic regulatory body, a central body, that would bypass the national legislatures of the countries in that federation and use regulation, bureaucratic regulation, to coordinate and control the European Economic Community. And that's exactly what we saw emerge under the Treaty of Lisbon that established the current structure of the European Union. All right. So in other words, Germany's in the driver's seat still. That's very clear. You can even kind of see this on the faces whenever Merkel is around, other European leaders. She's the one, Berlin is the one calling the shots. So the mechanisms of the European Union, and particularly this regulatory turn away from legislation towards regulation, that was the brainchild of a Nazi lawyer during World War II by the name of Dr. Walter Hallstein, Hallstein. All right. If you look at Dr. Walter Hallstein, you will see him hovering in the corridors of power after the war with Chancellor Adenauer. He's there with Adenauer signing the German for Germany at the creation of the European Economic Community. You will see Dr. Hallstein signing the treaty that establishes CERN. You will see Dr. Walter Hallstein in the administrations of the post-war chancellors Kurt Georg Kiesinger, Ludwig Erhard, and all the way up to Willy Brandt. In other words, this guy is a permanent fixture of German politics, regardless of which political party is in power. And he stays there, and he was part of the theorizing under the Nazis for the creation of a European Union. So again, it looks to me like you have a little bit of post-war influence going on here. It's not a bunch of Germans hiding out in grass skirts, in grass huts, in the Amazon basin after the war. It's much huger.
Wow. Now, I would like to digress. I would like to digress for a moment. In your recent, on your YouTube channel, you do a news and views from the Nefarium. And by the way, I got to tell you, what a clever name. I just love that. You spoke about a Paul Craig Roberts article where he discusses that Kissinger is advising Trump on how to improve relations with Russia.
Right.
This is, reminiscent of the Madrid Circular.
Right.
And that we currently have U.S. troops building up on the Russian border. We're sending troops to Poland. What is it, Norway? I think that we just sent 300 troops to Norway, along with some of the Norwegian troops.
Correct.
What do you make of what is going on right now, and where is Kissinger in all this?
All right, this is such a huge question. We have to remember that the United States is the inheritor of the geopolitical policy of the British Empire. And that policy was first formulated by a British geopolitician by the name of Sir Halford Mackinder. And usually when people refer to Mackinder, they refer to his 3 dictums of geopolitics that he formulated as World War I is taking place. And we have to remember, from the British point of view at that time, Germany represented this enormous industrial colossus, and it still does, by the way. Germany is one of the few countries in the West that has not allowed its heavy industry, its heavy tool and die industry, to be shipped overseas. All right, they have an enormous industrial plant in Germany, far beyond. It's the 4th or 5th largest economy in the world on a population base of about 80 million people. All right, so it is an enormous economy. And this has always been the root of the problem of Germany. Germany has such a large industrial base that can turn itself into an enormous military potential at the drop of a hat, if need be. And to drive that point home, we also need to remember that Germany produces all of its armaments for its military entirely in Germany and under license to no one. Whereas the 120 millimeter cannon on our own M1A1 Abrams tanks is what? It's a German cannon.
Nuh-uh.
Yes, it is. It's a Rhine.
Wow.
It's a Rheinmetall Borzig Rheinmetall Defense Systems cannon made in this country under license. Okay, so in other words, yeah, you know, we're not in a very good way here, folks. So the British and Halford Mackinder were formulating geopolitics, and to them, the problem was always Russia and Russia's dominant position on the Eurasian landmass, just by its sheer size and strategic depth. So Mackinder formulated 3 dictums of geopolitics. Who controls the world island controls the world. He who controls the Eurasian heartland controls the world island. In other words, the Eurasian heartland being Eastern Europe on into Western European Russia up to the Ural Mountains. And who controls Berlin controls the heartland, that Eurasian heartland. All right, those are his 3 dicta. All right. Now, if you look at contemporary American geopolitics, and here I'm going to sound like an absolute nut, but I'm actually
please, you're in the right place.
I'm taking my cue from Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Oh yeah,
who in his book, The Grand Chessboard, said that NATO was created as much to deal with the problem of German power as it was to deal with the problem of Russian power. Okay? He comes right out and says that. So I'm taking the view that contemporary American geopolitics vis-a-vis Europe and vis-a-vis Germany, particularly, is number 1, to make sure that Germany stays in NATO, and number 2, that Germany is at the center of the European Union so that we can dominate Europe through Germany. All right. But if you now look at our troop deployments, what are they doing? They're positioning American troops. And, you know, I used to know back in Oxford, I knew the guy that would eventually become the Polish defense minister, Radek Sikorski. All right. I knew him at Oxford. And what you see the Americans doing is they're pulling troops out of their bases in Western Europe and shifting them into Eastern Europe. And the question becomes why? Well, the real reason, I suspect, is that the last thing the United States wants to see happen is for any sort of German-Russian rapprochement. And the way that you interdict that from happening is to position your troops in the middle. The problem is we're also putting our troops right in the middle between Russia and Germany, you know, which from a purely geopolitical and military and logistical point of view doesn't seem to be too smart. You know?
Seriously.
But you know, third time's the charm here, folks. But anyway, this is what it looks to me like is going on. So now let's get to Kissinger. If you look at Trump, and to lay all my cards on the table here, I'm a critical supporter. Let's put it that way. I'm not an enthusiastic one, but certainly him better than Hillary Clinton. But if you look at Kissinger and if you look at Trump, we have to remember that Trump made his fortune in real estate and casinos. And what is one huge part of the American deep state? Well, it's the mafia. And if you are a member of the mafia, I'm getting a little feedback here, guys. If you're the mafia and you've been watching your bottom line dwindle because Obamacare and other things have gutted the discretionary income of the American middle class to go spend their money at your casinos in Las Vegas, then you've got a problem. So initially I thought, okay, Trump is being backed by that element of the American deep state that has been looking at the domestic and foreign policies that have been pursued since the Clinton administration under Bush II and under Obama, and saying this is getting us nowhere. We're losing our income, we are losing our allies, and we have nothing to show for it other than a lot of dead bodies and pissed off people around the world. So Kissinger, amazingly enough, about 3 years ago began making private visits to Vladimir Putin in Russia, and then writing these articles about America needs to reverse course vis-a-vis Russia. And that was a clear break, and that to me indicated there was a clear break in the American deep state, because Kissinger's a Rockefeller man, and so is Zbigniew Brzezinski. So in other words, there is a clear fissure, a clear difference of policy-making opinion within the American deep state. And it's Kissinger that's representing that disenfranchised portion, in my opinion, of the American deep state that's decided to back Donald Trump and go a different course. Now, the real geopolitical game here, I think, and Kissinger's come right out and said it, the United States has to get as close to Russia as possible as a counterweight to China's growing influence, and if possible, has to woo Russia away from that strategic alliance with China, okay? Now, I can tell you right now, that ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, we're not doing a very good job of that.
Well, not so far, but you know, Trump just took office today. You can't expect an overnight turnaround.
Okay, certainly, but in your most recent news and views, you read an article discussing how Turkey decided, or is very close to making the decision,
Yes.
to not join NATO and to join the Shanghai Cooperation.
Right. Well, Turkey is a member of NATO. We need to remember that. But Turkey is not a member of the European Union. It's been trying to get into...
I'm sorry, that's right. That's what I meant. I also wanted to add that Turkey is deep inside of the Gladio network.
Oh, yes. Deeply. Hugely, deeply inside of it. But Turkey, you know, it looks to me like Turkey's decided to cast its lot with the up-and-coming economic powers and not the dead empire. Turkey looks to me like it's been pursuing a strategic reevaluation of the course that it wants to set. And certainly the amount of agreements that I talked about in that news and views indicate that, you know, it's proceeding apace. The real problem is Russia, I don't think, is ever going to abandon its strategic alliance with China. If you look at Russian diplomacy under Vladimir Putin, it's been very, very careful. It's been very, very well thought out. The overtures he's made to Japan, that is a key part of the story, because he's using Japan as a counterweight to growing Chinese influence in Siberia. So in other words, Russia is not going to abandon the realpolitik game. However, I do think that the prospects for some sort of cooperative agreements with Russia are very, very good. They may not go all the way that Kissinger wants to go, but I do think that they're rather good, for the simple reason that we can no longer afford a worldwide unipolar world in this country. We simply cannot do it. We don't have the financial resources. We don't have the military resources to do it. So it makes a lot of sense for Kissinger to be saying these things. And the most important thing here is that Zbigniew Brzezinski himself, just last month, came out with an article admitting the game is up. The unipolar dream is over. We're now in a multipolar world. We've got to adjust ourselves accordingly. So even Zbigniew Brzezinski has now, you know, come around to the position. This is what I think we see going on here. And on the other side of that deep state factional division, you have, of course, the neocons and neoliberals trying doggedly to maintain their base of power. And
again, that reminds me of the Madrid Circular, where part of their intention was to create an American unipolar movement around the world, to the point where they were isolated.
Precisely, and that's exactly what's happened.
That's exactly what's happening. Are we seeing the end of that right now? We're seeing a move to another phase.
Right. Not for nothing did Angela Merkel donate money to Hillary Clinton's campaign. You know, talking about foreign influence. There it is.
So this banding together, you're talking about BRICS, right?
Yes. Yeah. The BRICS of bloc.
So yeah, and do you think that Turkey it'll be BRICS?
I suspect eventually that Turkey is going to make a formal commitment, but not immediately.
Well, they were already a formal observer of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Right, they were. And, you know, the economic handwriting is on the wall. And this is Merkel's problem. Merkel has played lapdog to American foreign policy, but, you know, German businessmen know which side of the bread is buttered, and that's with the East. So Merkel, you know, Merkel's in quite a bit of a political pickle. The way I look at it, guys, is this is the other factor that we need to remember about contemporary geopolitics. And that is, I view the recent election in this country not as an election, but as a referendum. And certainly Mr. Trump tapped into that when he kept saying Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo. All right. It was a referendum, in a certain sense, on the policies of Mr. Globaloney over the last 30 years, since the first Clinton administration, really going all the way back to G.H.W. Bush. It was a referendum on these policies. It was a referendum on multiculturalism, globalism, the immigration crisis, you name it. It was a referendum on that. So regardless of whether or not Mr. Trump is successful or not with some of his agenda, this is a phenomenon that's not going to go away. It will reappear, and reappear in force majeure, if these agendas are not accomplished. So in other words, this was not about candidates as much as it was about ideas and about policy formation and where we want to go. We see the same thing happening in Europe with Marine Le Pen in France, with Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, with the Alternative for Deutschland party in
Brexit.
Right.
Yeah.
Same thing is going on.
Yeah, that's right.
And like it or not, guys, the economics of the situation, the Brexit vote, classic example. Britain's doing just fine, having voted itself out of the European Union. So
yeah, they're not starving. So.
And let's remember, Queen Elizabeth herself expressed huge reservations about the European Union when she called the vice premier to Buckingham Palace last year. This made all the tabloid headlines in the United Kingdom. Yeah. And at dinner and tea, when the Queen calls, you go.
Yeah,
it's not an invitation; it's an order, guys.
Yeah, they propagandized it so bad that it would be the end of the world.
Oh yeah. But no, the Queen herself expressed reservations to the Vice Premier of Great Britain at that dinner and tea at Buckingham Palace. She said, "Can you list 3 good reasons why we should stay in the EU?" That was her dinner conversation topic. So in other words, Queen Elizabeth herself, in the way that the royal family does, is expressing reservations. Yeah. And we all know that behind the scenes, they exercise a huge amount of political power in the United Kingdom.
Well, I've come to the understanding they're actually German, from German descent.
Yes, the House of Windsor, the House of Windsor, the actual last name of the family, and it was changed to Windsor during World War I when they were fighting the Kaiser. The House of Windsor's actual family name is von Sachse, Coburg und Gotha. All right, it's a German family. We forget Kaiser Wilhelm was the grandson of Queen Victoria.
Yeah, don't you usually describe World War I as a family feud?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And apparently the Bushes are related to the royals as well. So it's all this interlinking.
Tsar Nicholas II was first cousin to Kaiser Wilhelm II and to King George VII. Okay. So in other words, this is all one big happy family. And if you really get into it, you can trace out connections to the Dutch royal house, the House of Orange. You can trace connections to the Habsburgs. You can, to the Habsburgs, to the Bourbons, to the House of Savoy in Italy. It's just all one big happy family, that decided they wanted to start a world war. But
with Albert Pike's help.
Well, look, I wanted to address that statement about Albert Pike. Supposedly, there was at one time that you could access in the British Museum a letter of Albert Pike to
Giuseppe
Mazzini in Italy, the Italian revolutionary, where the plan was to create 3 world wars. The first to get rid of the royal houses, the second to bring into power communism, and the third, which we haven't fought yet, to eradicate religion. In other words, to eradicate the 3 great monotheisms so that they could bring in a glorious Luciferian.
Right.
Yeah.
The problem there, guys, is that letter, which supposedly was there, has now disappeared. So in other words, there is no provenance for the claim. There's no
prove either way.
Right. You cannot prove that this was actually said. However, given the
It's very similar to the Madrid Circular. It's remarkably prescient.
yeah, it's very similar to the Madrid Circular. Given the role of the Grand Orient Masonic lodges in the French Revolution, and their infiltration in turn by elements of the Bavarian Illuminati, you do have to give pause. And the other thing that people need to remember, you can go online and look up the trial transcripts of the assassins of Archduke Franz Ferdinand that began World War I, the Austrian trial transcripts of these people. And if you read the transcripts carefully, you will find these guys talking about the Masonic influence within their Black Hand organization in Serbia. So yeah, there's something going on that most people don't want to talk about. The problem is being able to gather enough information to connect the dots to make an arguable, good prima facie case.
Okay, Providence aside, Albert Pike refers to, in the end of this letter, he says, and then finally we shall unleash the nihilists.
Right.
Who do you suppose the nihilists are? Are they the Germans?
No. The nihilists are a group of revolutionaries. A good place to study these people would be the former Librarian of Congress's book by James Billington called "Fire in the Minds of Men," and the subtitle of the book is called "The Origins of the Revolutionary Faith." Okay, he does yeoman's work in detailing these things. The nihilists were a group of revolutionaries, anarchists. You see them talked about in the works of Fyodor Dostoevsky in Russia. These are the people clustered in and around Bukharin, and taking the cue again from Adam Weishaupt and the Bavarian Illuminati, that in order to bring in a new revolution, we need to destroy all vestiges of traditional society, of traditional culture, of traditional government, of traditional religion. So in other words, it's truly nihilistic.
Okay.
And you certainly see elements of that, in my opinion, you certainly see elements of that in the radical left that exists in Western nations. So yeah, there's something going on.
Certainly, religions are under attack from all forms. All religions are under attack from all angles these days.
Right.
Absolutely.
Very true.
And we see a lot of these ancient structures being destroyed and whatnot, too.
That's
Yes.
another thing I wanted.
Yes, exactly.
I wanted to cover with you is it seems rather systematic that somewhere behind the scenes that there's a directorate to literally wipe clean the physical, tangible history, our human history, to just literally annihilate it.
Right.
Yep.
And all what like as I said, very systematically. And now these days we have ISIS, who's responsible these days for running around and destroying. In
Yes.
fact, I just heard on the news, I think yesterday, that they blew up some. Oh God, I can't even remember right now.
There was a temple in Palmyra.
Yeah,
Right.
temple,
Yes.
yeah.
An old temple. Well, yes, I think that's definitely an agenda, and Islam is the cover to pursue it.
Right.
But I also think there's another agenda, and a much more secret one, and that is the scramble of the power elites, the oligarchies in different great powers, to recover some of those ancient artifacts, and particularly anything that would give them a clue as to potential ancient high technology.
Right.
You saw Nazi Germany was really the first country that made that an official department of the state. When Heinrich Himmler, Reichsfuhrer SS, in 1940, he promulgates a decree that establishes in the SS a department called the Ahnenerbedienst, which was the Ancestral Research Bureau. And in this decree, Himmler states that we're going to go out and collect all of this information about esoteric lore and artifacts and archaeology and all of this stuff for, and here are his exact words, for their potential military application.
Right.
So in other words, there's an admission right there that Nazi Germany understands there's something in these ancient texts that's strongly suggesting a very high technology existed once long ago. Let's go find it.
Right.
Anybody who studies the Nazis in any mild capacity will quickly come across information suggesting that they are in fact creepy cultist bastards.
Right.
And we are quite literally living a real life Indiana Jones right before our eyes, because
Yes,
it's
yes.
no secret that the Germans at least, are among, if not the best archaeologists in the world.
Well, you have, yeah, Peter Levenda put it best when he described the Ahnenerbedienst as a humanities program with guns.
With guns. I've heard you say that before.
With guns. You know, it's not my statement, it's Peter Levenda.
Yeah.
But you know, this is exactly what it was. Well, you see the British, you know, throughout the 19th century, there's this mad scramble that really begins with Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798. You see the European powers on this mad scramble to get into the Middle East and some of these places where you have artifacts from ancient cultures and bring them back to Europe, you know. And so it looks very much to me, and of course Himmler just kind of makes it official, you know, this is what we're really up to, folks. So, you know, even after the war, you have the Soviet Union doing the same thing. You have the Pentagon, you know, the CIA, for that matter, expressing an interest on finding Noah's Ark, and physicists from Stanford Research Institute going to Giza and measuring cosmic rays and coming up with very, very weird results.
It's interesting that you mentioned Noah's Ark. I wanted to ask you and touch upon, and this is going to enter the realm of possibly your high-octane speculation, the term Noah's Ark, and then you know, the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
In our modern time, we use the word arc to describe two things. One would be a radius, and another would be an electrical arc.
Right. Right.
Which
right.
would suggest something of a high technology.
Well, sure. Noah's Ark, if you look at the way, pardon me, not Noah's Ark, but rather the Ark of the Covenant, if you look at the description of this device in the Old Testament, it looks very strongly, and many electrical engineers have pointed out, I'm not unique in this, pointed out that it looks like it's designed to be a capacitor of some sort. In other words, you know, storing massive amounts of direct current static electricity. And it certainly is. I mean, you've got gold leaf and layered wood and gold leaf, that's a dielectric. And certainly carrying it around on poles is a big hint, you know, don't touch this thing, or
right.
Yeah, really.
You might get a little discharge from it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of suggestions in a lot of ancient literature. I talk about it at great length in my book, The Cosmic War, that when you read these ancient texts, very clearly you're reading descriptions in the best language they had available to them. You're reading descriptions of some sort of technology. So yeah, it stands to reason that you're going to go looking for it. You know, we have to remember that Saddam Hussein, when he was still in power in Iraq, had whole teams of French and German archaeologists digging up the country for him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
and the first thing we did was we looted the Baghdad Museum.
Well, we here is a problematic word.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Because let's go back, you know, I've talked about the looting in footnotes, extended footnotes in some of my books. That's an interesting story, because let's take this in sequence. We invade Iraq. When we go into Iraq under George Bush, the ostensible reason we're told that we're going in there is to prevent Saddam Hussein from acquiring weapons of mass destruction. Okay? Now, we now know that this was complete fabrication. So the story goes.
Right.
However, my problem is we may not have been talking about atomic, biological, or chemical weapons of mass destruction. We may have been talking about something ancient. Okay?
Yeah.
So when we decide to go into Iraq, we tell the French and Germans, get your archaeological teams out of there, we're coming in. Okay? Then the Baghdad Museum looting happens. And let's remember who broke the story. It was Der Spiegel magazine in Germany. Okay, and what did Der Spiegel report? American soldiers seen going into the Baghdad Museum and carting out stuff. Okay,
but they weren't Americans, were they?
But hang on, in my opinion, probably not. In my opinion, probably German BND in American uniforms. Okay, But let's remember what we were also told. It looks like this was an inside job because they knew exactly where to go and exactly what to get. Okay? Now, here's the problem. If you study the Baghdad Museum looting, the Baghdad Museum itself, the National Museum of Iraq, had no central catalog of what was in there. But the real question remains then, if there's no central catalog and it's an inside job, then how did they know where to go and what to get?
It was the German archaeologists.
It was the German and French archaeological teams that kept the field catalogs of what they were digging up that would have known. All right, that's the problem. And the other problem we have to remember when we look at the Baghdad Museum looting is that a Marine colonel, Bogdanovich was his name, actually wrote a book on the Baghdad Museum looting. They recovered a lot of the art artifacts under the Marine operation to do so. The real thing that is never talked about is what happened to all the cuneiform tablets.
Wasn't there 10,000 went
There
missing?
were tens of thousands
Oh,
of
jeez.
Oh, geez.
cuneiform tablets that went missing. And oh, by the way, lo and behold, some of them turned up in Spain.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, do the dot connecting there, folks.
Wow.
So Spain was a major post-war Nazi hub.
Oh yeah, you betcha. Otto Skorzeny based himself in Spain. That was his.
The Madrid Circular came out of there.
The Madrid Circular came out of Madrid. Otto Skorzeny had his offices on a floor of the same building shared by the American CIA. Otto Skorzeny sponsored that late 1960s International Terrorist Conference that was attended by people like Yasser Arafat. You know, and we didn't even talk about Nazi connections to radical Islamic terrorism, but it was Otto Skorzeny that sponsored that conference, and he got the funding for it from a Swiss banker by the name of Francois Genoud. I won't even go into him. You'll find out about him in the 9/11 book and who he's banking for. But
Wow.
you can think of people like the Bin Laden family and Joseph Goebbels and, and people like that. So, you know, he's Mr. Banker for the international Nazi network, in other words. So, and he's also incidentally the banker that persuaded the Bin Laden family to make Deutsche Bank their bank of choice. Okay, so this guy has his financial fingers in just about every pie, in addition to being financial agent for the estate of Adolf Hitler, you know, things like that. So it's quite a story once you get into it.
A tangled web we weave.
It is a tangled web.
Words right out of my mouth.
Very, very. I'm just curious, do you think that there might be some group that is even further behind all of this activity that might be, you know, creating some divide and conquer amongst that level as well as, you know, down here within us peons?
All right, my take on this sort of, if I can put it this way, this sort of grand unified conspiracy theory has always been that there is no one group that has some sort of diabolical master plan and it's all working itself out like a Swiss watch. Okay, I view it more as an international mafia with various factions that are all sitting around a big conference table, smoking their cigars, sipping their brandies, kissing each other's rings while they're shooting at each other out on the street, because we're in the end game. So you want your faction to be the ones on top and in control of everything when the shooting stops. In other words, I don't view that there's any one group in charge of things in that sense.
They just want one's ultimate power over the other is
right.
What it boils down to. Right.
Right. You have a bunch of factions, a bunch of interests, corporations, banks, defense industries, intelligence agencies, international criminal underground organizations, you know, drug running, secret societies. They're all in this mix. Okay.
So in other words, the
Right.
New World Order is coming. It's just a matter of who's going to lead it.
Run it.
Right.
Who's going to be on top?
Who's going
Right.
to be on top? And you know, I view the New World Order as New World chaos. That's really what
But
it
if you
is.
look at the Freemason structure itself, it's basically a worldwide brotherhood,
Right.
and they've all got one common goal, right?
Supposedly.
Supposedly, right?
Supposedly,
Supposedly.
but again, I look at the Masons as kind of a front organization. You know, this is the way that Adam Weishaupt propagated the Illuminati back in the 18th century. He infiltrated Masonic lodges with his own agenda and with his own personnel. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, Masonry is a perfect structure for that sort of thing. I'm not saying it isn't a power structure. It is. But it's
like
not
a breeding ground for,
right. It's a breeding ground for something else. It's like the intelligence agencies. They operate out of fronts, and they operate largely in terms of personal networks and associations of people that they can trust that are on board with them. So we have to stop thinking of this group or that group. We have to start doing the real research work and noticing the personal network connections of these people and who they're connected to, and how those connections in turn correlate with policy formation and with the actual pursuit of agendas.
So where would you think the Jesuit order would come in on this? Because basically the Vatican's been the ultimate authority for, you know, forever now, right? And nothing has really changed, right?
Yeah.
Well,
do
it
all
claims
roads
that,
actually lead to Rome?
Yeah, like all roads do lead to.
the Vatican is tremendously powerful for several reasons, not simply because of the Jesuits. The Jesuits are certainly powerful. They've certainly had their hand in a lot of conspiratorial goings on in the past. We all know this.
Mhm.
But I'm not even looking to them as the real root of power that the Vatican has. First of all, the Vatican has a tremendous amount of soft power, cultural power. We cannot conceive of Western civilization without three core elements. It's Judeo-Christian roots and its humanistic roots. Those are the three pillars of our civilization. And to neglect any one of them, of course, leaves you with a two-legged stool, and the civilization comes crashing down. So the Vatican has a tremendous amount of soft power in that regard. But the other thing that we need to remember is that the Vatican, unique amongst Christian churches, is a centralized hierarchical organization. The Orthodox Church is hierarchical, but it's not centralized. The Vatican is therefore the oldest political chancery in the world that has been in continual operation for 2 millennia. So it has an extreme amount of experience on how to maneuver diplomatically, how to maneuver financially. And the final thing we need to remember about the Vatican is, because it is a centralized organization, it's a huge on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground, grassroots intelligence gathering agency.
I was just going to say that.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
Within the three
Okay,
Trinity cities, right? So it's
all right. Since we're on the subject of strange stuff, let's shift to Antarctica.
Okay.
Now, Buzz Aldrin made a trip to Antarctica.
Yeah.
For some reason, I don't remember how old he is, 86 or something like that.
Right.
And apparently he was evacuated for medical reasons. That's the story that we're told.
Right.
A part of the story that we're told is that Buzz Aldrin warns that there's some evil in Antarctica. Recently, John Kerry made a visit to Antarctica.
Right.
And as you pointed out in one of your news and views, that the Patriarch of Moscow, which is the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, made a visit down to Antarctica. What the hell is going on in Antarctica?
Yeah, really.
Okay, look at all the strange people you have associated with Antarctica. You've mentioned 3 of them: Buzz Aldrin, an Apollo lunar astronaut, the Patriarch of Moscow, the senior diplomat of the United States, who takes time off during a diplomatic junket around the world to fly south to Antarctica, so the story we're told, to study
right in the middle of the election, no less.
Right in the middle of the election, to go down there and personally study climate change data because Secretary Kerry has an interest in climate change. Well, you know, come on, guys. You know, he's the Secretary of State, for crying out loud. He can pick up the phone at Foggy Bottom in Washington, D.C. and have all the climate change data he could ever imagine placed right on his desk with nice, neat, tidy summaries by analysts. He doesn't need to fly there in the middle of a diplomatic junket, okay?
Right.
No.
So that's, you know, that raises my suspicion meter into the red zone. But let's look at some other visitors to Antarctica. Prince Harry of Great Britain,
Right.
King Juan Carlos of Spain. You know,
Wow.
yeah,
You know all these people.
yeah, we've had a whole list of people. We're told that the Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill III, went down there to bless. I'm getting feedback again, guys. Went down there to Antarctica to bless the Orthodox chapel there. Well, I'm thinking, you know, I'm Eastern Orthodox. I know enough about Orthodox practice to know that any bishop can go down there and bless
the snow.
And bless the snow and bless the chapel.
Hitler took secret missions down there too.
Right. We don't need to haul the Patriarch of Moscow down there to bless a chapel, you know, especially after he just came from a meeting with Pope Francis I. You know, so there is something going on. But let's look at other people connected with Antarctica. In 1938, the Nazis sponsored an expedition to Antarctica. They flew Admiral Richard Byrd over from the United States to brief them on the conditions and so on that they'd find. And they go down to Antarctica. They fly airplanes over the part of Antarctica that they were claiming, dropping little flags with swastikas on it and claiming it for the greater glory of the Third Reich, doing photo reconnaissance of Antarctica, where supposedly they discovered vast amounts of the continent were not under snow and being fed by warm underwater lakes and so on and so forth. And then they make a beeline back to Germany in April of 1939, following this crazy zigzag course all the way up from Antarctica through the Atlantic Ocean. They get back to Germany, and the sponsors of the expedition, one Rudolf Hess, Reichsleiter of the Nazi Party, and one Hermann Goering, Reichsmarshal Goering, head of the German Luftwaffe and founder of the Gestapo, strike a medallion for the expedition, and then you never hear about it. So you can add to Kirill III and Buzz Aldrin and King Juan Carlos and Secretary John Kerry, you can add Rudolf Hess and Hermann Goering with a connection to Antarctica. So, you know, what's going on down there? Obviously, there's something going on down there. Let's not forget President Clinton, during his administration, came out with that press conference with the meteor from Mars and says, hey, it looks like we found life on Mars. So you had a lot of strange people associated with Antarctica. So the question is, what is it? Well, my high-octane speculation, quite bluntly, is if there is one place on planet Earth that looks to be the fulfillment or possible fulfillment of the basic outlines of the story of Atlantis in Plato's Critias and Timaeus dialogues, Antarctica is it. Because what is Antarctica? It's a continent under water, under lots of ice. That's what it is. So if there's a place on Earth, especially if you're Nazis and you've got all of this quest for ancient high technology and artifacts and so on, as part of a mission brief of an entire department of the German state, that would be a place you'd want to send people to. So my suspicion is they have found something in Antarctica that may indicate some lost human civilization, possibly of a high technological nature. That's my suspicion.
It has to be something really important, way more than, oh, we found some resources.
Right, exactly.
or gee, we've got to look at all this global warming.
Yeah, exactly. You know,
it's like, no, I don't think so.
You know, we've got satellites to do that. We don't need to
Hitler
fly
went
there.
down there numerous times. That's what I was told. And they were working on something. They were digging down deep into the ice. There was something there. And
well, the Russians
they formed that treaty as well, right? Where you can't go there. You know, you can only go there by special permission.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So there's got to be something. And then, of course, when Hitler, suppose, I don't know if the story is really true or not, but he escaped in a nuclear submarine and went and lived his days out in South America. Does that?
Argentina.
Well, there are several different scenarios out there about how Hitler escaped Europe. Some people maintain that he was flown out. Some people maintain it was a combination of a submarine getaway with a later trip from national Spain by airplane. I think it is fairly clear that, and I've changed my position on it over the years, that he probably did make it out of there. Argentina is a key part of this story for several reasons, and I've outlined them in my books. The most important one in this respect would be a book that I published in 2009 called The Nazi International. Because when you read it, you'll discover that what the Nazis in Argentina are doing is anything but hiding out from the Mossad in grass huts, in grass skirts, in fear of their life.
Yeah, weren't they in control of something like 10,000 square miles of property under Juan Perón?
Yes, in the Rio Negro province of Argentina.
Rio Negro, that's right.
Which is the capital of that is a little city in Argentina called San Carlos de Bariloche.
The Black River.
The Black River. There is a sizable German emigre community and many veterans in that region of Argentina. The architecture in that region of Argentina is distinctly German. There's just no other way of describing it. It's German. But in the middle of San Carlos de Bariloche, there's a hotel. Okay? And if you look at pictures of this hotel, I have a picture of it in my book, The Nazi International. If you look at the pictures of this hotel, it looks like a nice, cozy Bavarian chalet. Okay? The hotel was built prior to World War II by German funds as a plastic surgery clinic. Okay?
Plastic surgery.
Plastic surgery. Yes, sir. And,
okay.
Okay.
Now that makes sense.
Yeah, why would we need to build a nice, bright, shiny German plastic surgery clinic?
Well, as you mentioned earlier about the Project Valkyrie, which was the bomb plot against Hitler, you suggest in your book that strongly that might have been a false flag for the purpose of getting high-ranking German Nazi officials out of Germany, because after the war, you don't look for dead Germans.
That's right. Exactly. If they're dead, why bother looking for them? You know, Hitler's dead. You know, we heard the shot. Notice that the whole Hitler died in the bunker story is being told by who? Nazis. Okay, so all of a sudden, you know, this is my whole problem with the Hitler died in the bunker story. All throughout the war, and even before, the West is vilifying these people as a bunch of sociopathic liars, and then all of a sudden at the very end of the war, we've got to believe everything they say about what happened in the bunker when Hitler supposedly shot himself and Eva Braun swallowed the cyanide.
No more questions asked.
No more questions asked. You know? So yeah, I find that a little bit suspicious, and I tell people, if you don't believe the story, then let's put the story this way. If you were a big life insurance company like Prudential and you had a life insurance policy on Adolf Hitler, would you pay it out on the basis of the story?
Oh, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. You know, of course you wouldn't.
And so we have a plastic surgery clinic down in Argentina.
Yeah.
For just such a purpose, to continue helping to hide.
Ding, ding. Ding, ding, ding. And that's not all they're doing there, but you know,
right.
That San Carlos
smuggled. Did they get the Bell? Do you think they've managed to get the Bell project down to Argentina?
Read the Nazi International. Short answer, yes. Short answer, yes. But the detailed connections, read that book, read my book Roswell and the Reich. and I think you'll really start to see some dots there that will blow the mind. Remember, the third way is the last book in a very long series of books that I've written about this post-war Nazi operation. All right, go back and read the Nazi International and Roswell and the Reich, and it will make the third way. It will provide the context for the third way.
Okay, I got you.
But let's put it this way: isn't it interesting that several American presidents have made visits to San Carlos de Bariloche? Okay, including Jimmy Carter, including Barack Obama last year when he went down.
Not the humanitarian Jimmy Carter.
Not the humanitarian, yes, Jimmy Carter. And there's even a story that the Argentines tell you that even Dwight Eisenhower visited there in 1954. So
Didn't Barack Obama make a trip down there?
Yeah, I just said he just went down there. Yeah, he did.
And who did he took with him? It was a bunch of NASA scientists?
NASA people, yes. Yeah. Golly.
Wow.
And now we have.
I told you guys this is a big story.
Yep.
Okay, we're up on our second break, fellas, and I'm going to play one more song from Juxtapose. This is 2 minutes and 37 seconds long. And one more time, give me just a moment because I want to, oops, sorry. I need to do a screen share. I want to make sure he gets credit for it. And so everybody has something to look at. And give me just a moment, please. OSE, there he is. Sorry, I should have had this queued up already. So we're going to take another break here, and we will be back in about another 2.5 minutes. And this song here is called Clockwork. And we're back one more time with Dr. Joseph Farrell. That was Juxtapose, Clockwork. And I'm going to undo the screen share and get back to where we were. All right. So, all right, we were discussing Antarctica. We were discussing the Nazis and all kinds of weird stuff. Joseph, you have mentioned Richard Hoagland on a few occasions,
Right.
and I just wanted to mention this to you and just get your thoughts or comments. It might have been as early as the 80s when I had a friend hand me a VHS cassette tape of Richard Hoagland talking about what he called tetrahedral technology. Have you heard that term? Are you familiar?
Oh yes, I know Richard very well. Visited him many times, and that's his term for a kind of physics that he thinks you can see embodied in the monuments of Mars. You know, he wrote a whole book on the
Oh,
subject.
I think it goes far beyond Mars. If I remember correctly, if you take a star tetrahedron, which is the three-dimensional version of the Star of David,
Right.
and you place it inside of a sphere, and in this case, we're talking about a planetary sphere,
Right.
and you put the apex at the north pole of the one tetrahedron, and you put the apex at the south pole of the other tetrahedron, what you're going to get is a combination of 3 points on the base of each tetrahedron is going to touch, okay,
At
the outer ring of the sphere at 19.5 degrees latitude. And
Right.
at those locations, you're going to get all kinds of strange anomalous energy upwellings,
Right.
such as, first of all, on Earth, we have the Great Pyramid of Giza. And I may not be able to name them all. We have the Bermuda Triangle. We have the Mount Kilauea in Hawaii, which is the largest, most continuous erupting volcano on Earth.
Right.
Now this translates to Mars, where they find Cydonia. They found Mount forgive me,
Olympus Mons.
That's correct, Olympus Mons. And then it translates even further as on Jupiter. Their great red spot of Jupiter is located at 19.5. And most people don't know this, but also on the planet Uranus, there's a blue spot, which is also located at 19.5
Right.
latitude.
Yep.
Right. And you also you have another signature on the planet Saturn at the north pole of Saturn with the hexagonal.
The hexagon.
Right.
Which if you ortho rotate 2 tetrahedra on the axis of rotation and circumscribe them in a sphere, the equator is going to give you a perfect hexagonal shape around that axis of rotation. So yeah, there appears to be something to it. Mr. Hoagland has also pointed out, I believe in his lecture at the United Nations, if I remember correctly, that a lot of the physics behind string theory is tetrahedral in nature. I don't know exactly where he got that, because he didn't say in the address he gave there at the UN. But yeah, he's been pressing that for a number of years.
That's remarkably interesting, particularly since you are a researcher and very familiar with the Giza pyramids.
Right, right. My first 3, or actually my first 2 books in this alternative field were about the Great Pyramid at Giza, and I should stress exclusively about the Great Pyramid of Giza, with a kind of passing reference to the other pyramids that are there. I pointed out, based on some research of some researchers in Canada that I don't remember their names off the top of my head, that if you run an axis of rotation through the apex of the Great Pyramid and then rotate the whole complex through 120 and then 240 degrees, again, you will find an outline of the Mogan David, of the Star of David, when you rotate it in that fashion. So it does appear that the complex itself is laid out very, very deliberately, very geometrically, on a very well thought out plan. The trick that most people miss is that it's a plan that's designed to be a representation of a rotation group, as mathematicians would call it. So it is very, very weird.
I'm curious about I can't remember his name now, but he says that the layout at Giza is more a representation of Cygnus than of Orion. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I can't place the researcher's name either, but this has been another aspect of Giza research going really all the way back to the Napoleonic era with Napoleon's invasion of Egypt. This was picked up by Stettinius, the Italian metrology researcher. Peter Tompkins published his book on the Great Pyramid. There are, let's put it this way, there are layered geometric properties at Giza. The tetrahedral Star of David thing, rotation group being only one of them. The other one is the presence within the compound there of a representation physically of the Fibonacci spiral. There is a representation of, some people think, the three stars of the belt of Orion with the three main pyramids there.
Right,
so
right, yeah.
Right. There are all these very, very deliberate geometric properties, not only to the Great Pyramid itself, but to the whole compound.
Right.
That clearly, the real question that I think Egyptology has never really explained adequately is, why do you need all that to bury a pharaoh?
Really?
Now, sorry if I cut in. Speaking on that, like, they weren't tombs. I'm with my understanding now, they were actually conductors, or like antennas. And you mentioned in an interview you had with Dark Journalists, you mentioned a shell of a machine. Right?
Yes.
And they found, in the past, they found burn marks throughout that passageway that goes
the
through
Grand
the
Gallery.
pyramid
Yes.
itself.
Yes.
They found some unusual looking black marks along the walls, things like that. I've been looking into all this, and it basically, I've come to the conclusion that this was a power antenna. These were antennas conducting electricity. When you look at things like the Baghdad battery and things like that, they had this technology back then.
Well,
and these were used for that.
Let me interject. I know exactly where you're going. There was an engineer. I've met him. We've talked together many times. We've even presented at conferences together, by the name of Christopher Dunn, that wrote a book toward the end of the 1990s called The Giza Power Plant. And he went in and looked at the Great Pyramid simply from the standpoint of an engineer, and came to the conclusion this is a machine of some sort. And the obvious thing is given away by the title of his book. It's for the production of power. In my opinion, and my three books are probably, those three books on the Giza Pyramid, the Great Pyramid, are the most wild hypothesis that I've proposed in any of my books. I think it was a weapon, and I think it was a weapon of mass destruction at that. So in other words, whatever the power output there was, it was not simply electrical. But it is very interesting when you look at the Great Pyramid. Number one, it is in resonance with the Schumann resonance of the Earth. Number two, It sits on 4 sockets. And most people don't know this. It sits on 4 sockets that allow the structure to constantly move and place all that granite and limestone under constant stress. And of course, granite and limestone are quartz-bearing rocks. And it's a piezoelectric stress machine is what it is. And in turn, the other problem that you have to bear in mind, and that I talk about in the second of the Pyramid books, is that the Soviet Union, most people do not know this, the Soviet Union during the 1960s and 70s had a very top secret research project into pyramid power. They actually built fiberglass pyramids, which are kind of a tourist attraction now in Russia, but they built these big fiberglass pyramids outside of Russia. And in their studies of pyramid,
Moscow.
Outside Moscow, yes, thank you. In their studies of pyramids, they came to a conclusion about pyramid structures, the basic geometrical shape of pyramids. Flat pyramids, in their estimation, are collectors. They don't radiate energy, they collect it. Tall, pointy pyramids, like an obelisk, are antennae because they radiate power. The Great Pyramid is exactly between the two. Because it can function as both. Now, it's very, very interesting that the Great Pyramid, and again, most people do not know this, the Great Pyramid is unique, absolutely unique in all pyramidal structures in the world.
8 sides.
Hear me out, please.
Sorry.
Is unique in all pyramidal structures in the world because the faces of the Great Pyramid are bent inward along the apothem, which is the line down each face from the apex to the bottom exact center of each face of the pyramid. So in other words, they are parabolic.
Right.
In other words, they're collectors, the faces of the pyramids. Now, the British during World War I and World War II would warn their pilots, don't fly over the thing because your radios will die.
Yeah, let's probably spin the dials and everything.
Oh yeah. This is quite true.
So it's still putting out energy.
Right. Now, getting back to your question, that I referred to it as the shell of a machine. If you read Zecharia Sitchin, and please don't get me wrong, I'm not giving my imprimatur to all of his ideas, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
But if you read Zecharia Sitchin, he on the basis of texts maintains that there were things that were in the Grand Gallery, in his estimation, crystals of some sort, that were taken out of the Grand Gallery and removed, okay? Along comes Chris Dunn, a British engineer, goes over to Giza, and he's got his calipers and everything, and he's looking at the Grand Gallery, and he's saying there's stuff that's absent here. So in other words, we're looking at, just on the basis of looking at the structure, not even knowing about what Sitchin had said about the texts, all right? Put the two together, and what you're looking at is the shell of a machine.
Right.
The shell.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, here's an interesting little bit. I just toss it in there for your consideration so that you can kind of cogitate about it. If you look at the ancient Mesopotamian word, Akur, Akkadian word, Akur means 3 things all at once. It means mountain, it means planet, and it means pyramid. Okay? So in Mesopotamian thinking, planets and pyramids are connected somehow. Okay, that's very, very weird.
All right.
You know, on and on we could go. But yeah, I think you're looking, in answer to Aaron's question, I think you're looking, pardon me, at the shell of a machine that's still exercising whatever its functions were, which in my opinion, you know, it's a very complex case that I try and lay out, but in my opinion, probably a weapon of some sort, and a powerful one.
Yeah, on a planetary scale, no doubt.
Yep.
Now, curiously, with all, and I'm not a scholarly researcher. I'm an amateur, like my colleagues here. We're
so
amateurs.
am I. Join the club.
It just seems that it doesn't matter what subject I look into,
right,
Joseph. It doesn't matter if I look into religion or archaeology or history or science.
Right.
There's just so many subjects. When you get to the bottom of the rabbit hole, or at least close to the bottom of the rabbit hole,
right,
to me, I find a common thread among every single conspiracy avenue, and it always boils down to consciousness.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Every single time. It has to do with human consciousness.
Right.
So it's been put forward that the obelisks and the pyramids had something to do with harnessing earth energies for the purpose of raising or aiding in human conscious advancement.
Right.
Were your thoughts on that?
I've heard that argument before. As a matter of fact, Chris Dunn advanced it once in a conference that we were both speaking at. And my response is in two levels. At the first level, we are now entering an area in the development of contemporary physics where there is an increasing focus on consciousness and its relationship to the material world. Go out and examine the works of Dr. William Tiller from the University of California, for example. He's done experiments in this area, and they're quite astounding when you read them, what he's done. So on one level, yes, if the Great Pyramid was a sophisticated machine, a product of a high technology, of a high civilization that's long lost, and if we're only beginning to recover some aspects of that science, then it would stand to reason that somehow consciousness was involved. But as to the actual assertion that it was designed to raise consciousness and so on and so forth, I would demur from that conclusion for the very simple reason that that area of the world is one of the bloodiest in human history. So if anything, if there is a consciousness effect from it, it seems to be affecting things very adversely, which would stand very much in line with my hypothesis that it was created as a weapon. Now, that said, there's something else that I get at in my book, The Cosmic War, when I look at all these ancient texts, because it seems very clear that if you look at those texts, at least it was clear to me, that whatever the ancient high technology of the gods was that those texts were talking about, one thing stands out very clear. It is only in close physical proximity or actual physical contact with the gods who wield these terrible instruments of mass destruction that those technologies work. In other words, it appears to me like there's some sort of biometric activation for those technologies, be it DNA, the right retina scan, what have you. But it is interesting, because if that in turn is the case, and you are launching expeditions to go recover this technology with secret archaeological expeditions, is you're going to want to find that biometric marker that can activate them. And hence, what do we see? We see huge efforts, the Human Genome Project, the FBI coming out with technologies to do DNA sequencing right on the spot, in an hour.
Yep.
And not have things sent off to a laboratory. So what are they looking for? Well, my high-octane suspicion is that they're also looking for some of these genetic markers that might be present in certain segments of the human population. Who knows? But that is one thing that does emerge from some of those ancient texts, that there's some sort of possible, in my opinion, some sort of possible biometric activation of these things.
Now, you mentioned this human resonance and how it relates to the Great Pyramid.
Right.
Would it be safe for me to assume that you're familiar with the science of cymatics?
Yes.
Okay. Considering the human resonance and the human consciousness that's present on Earth, having some effect on our physiology and our consciousness together simultaneously. Right. And I also eventually, before this last hour is up, we've got nearly a little bit more than a half hour to go. I also want to touch on CERN before we close this out, because I know that you're somewhat, not to put it in a pun form, but you're concerned with CERN and with some of the things that they're doing, and you've got some speculation that there's quite possibly a sinister or at least a secondary operation going on that may actually have to do with human development, human consciousness, human biology.
Well, not necessarily so much human consciousness or biology. Let's roll the tape back here just a bit and go back to my first level response to your previous question. Is there a physics of consciousness? I definitely think so. I think all the indications are there that serious scientists have begun to investigate this and explore it, and even to conduct proof of concept experiments with it. There's no doubt in my mind that this has been going on. It's been going on for a long time. My suspicion is, in addressing the question you've posed now, that consciousness has an effect on the material world, and that if you have a group consciousness effect, in other words, a group of people agreeing on a specific intentionality, in other words, creating a coherent field of conscious intent. This is what Dr. Tiller's experiments are all about, that has a group multiplier effect.
Similar to the 100 monkey theory?
Yes, right. Similar, very similar to that. That it has a group multiplier effect. Exactly the extent of that effect, in other words, can it be quantized? Can it be made a measurable effect with predictable scientific results? Remains to be seen, although Tiller's work does strongly suggest this. All right. Now, that said, when looking at CERN, and let me be very clear and lay the cards on the table. I'm not one of those that believes that CERN is opening portals to Saturn so that the devil can become incarnate and usher in the age of Antichrist. Okay, I'm not I'm not in that school. Okay.
But Joseph, just on that, I just want to what about the Gothard tunnel opening ceremony ritual?
Okay.
Because that shows us that they're opening a portal.
Well,
right?
yeah,
And that's very near to
they're
CERN.
opening a portal, but you can't leap from that to physics conclusions. That's my problem. Certainly, right. CERN has surrounded itself with a lot of occult symbology. Certainly. I'm not disputing that.
Shiva and
the whole thing. Yeah, right. I'm not disputing that.
Right.
I am disputing on the basis of an attempt to stick as close as I can to the known scientific papers that I've uncovered in my research as to what they might be up to, and then speculating on that basis. So I'm simply not going to the Book of Revelations and Saturnalia and opening portals so that the devil and demons can come in. No. When you look at CERN, let me take you back to a gentleman that I uncovered and mentioned in my book, another part of the Nazi series called Secrets of the Unified Field, the Philadelphia Experiment, the Philadelphia Experiment, the Nazi Bell, and the Discarded Theory. All right. In the interwar period, and this is well known to physicists, Michio Kaku writes about this in his books. In the interwar period, there were a number of unified field theories that were attempting to unify the geometry of electromagnetism and the geometry of general relativity, in other words, gravity, in one comprehensive field theory. All right. One of the first attempts of these was by a German, needless to say, by the name of Theodor Kaluza, professor of mathematics at the University of Königsberg. There were other attempts, Václav Hlavaty, the Hungarian physicist. Everybody was doing this. Albert Einstein was publishing papers in Mathematische Annalen on his attempts to create unified field theories. All right. Now, the important thing to note about all of these theories is that they require a hyperdimensional mathematics. In other words, a mathematics being done in more than 3 spatial dimensions. Okay? So we're dealing right now already with hyperdimensional physics. Now, in 1935, a Hungarian Jewish electrical engineer by the name of Gabriel Kron, K-R-O-N, published a paper and won the Montefiore Physics Prize at the University of Liège in Belgium. And what he said in the paper is nothing less than breathtaking, because he said that we can take these hyperdimensional equations that physicists are using to describe their unified field theories and general theory of relativity and so on and so forth, and use that same hyperdimensional mathematics to explain certain anomalous phenomena that electrical engineers are encountering in large networked rotating electrical systems. Now, that's the technical version. The plain English version of what he's just said is that we can take hyperdimensional mathematics to explain any electrical circuit. In other words, any electrical circuit is already, by dint of the case, a hyperdimensional machine. And that all of these anomalies may be due to an interface in our 3 dimensions with what's taking place in 4, 5, 6, and so on dimensions. Follow me?
Yeah, I do.
In other words, what he's just said is you can engineer the fabric of space-time with 1935 electrical technology on the laboratory bench. That's what he's just said. You can do it in your garage. It's very interesting that what happens at that point inside of Nazi Germany is that all publication on unified field theories in the scientific journals stops completely.
Yeah, that to me is extremely fascinating and very, very telling.
All right. Now,
at the same time.
Now, let's go to CERN. Let's look at the Large Hadron Collider. What is the Large Hadron Collider? Well, for one thing, it's a huge circular collider that has 2 proton streams that are being counter-rotated and then slammed into each other to create their collisions. So first of all, yeah, the God particle. We're being told this is all for particle physics. But now just inject Crone into the equation. What you've got here is a great, big, huge electrical circuit that's a hyperdimensional machine. The counter rotation interests me because this is precisely the principle on which the Nazi bell was built. All right. So in other words, it looks to me that in addition to a particle physics experiment, you've got experiments taking place in hyperdimensional physics. Now, CERN, when they first fired that machine up, was putting out the story, yeah, we're doing particle physics. Only recently have they been admitting that, yeah, we're looking for evidence of hyperdimensionality. All right. They have now admitted this. All right. But now let's go a step deeper. This has many layers. Most people don't realize that CERN is the world's biggest user of the internet. The reason why is twofold. Number one, CERN is generating billions of bits of data with each collision. So it has to have extremely high computing power. And that computing power, in turn, is based on programs that the scientists designed to select certain data from that huge pile of data that they're generating every second and pull it and bring it to the scientists' attention so that they can analyze. And of course, these committees of scientists are located all over the world. That's the other reason.
So they have a computing filtration system.
They have a computer filtration system that filters the data before they even get it. Okay? Now, once you've admitted that, and then you look at the fact that the magnets in CERN, and this is a key crucial point, the magnets in CERN are several times more powerful than the local magnetic field strength of the planet.
Yeah, you write in your book 15,000 times stronger than the local magnetic field.
In some cases, it's huge.
Wow.
Yeah. So in other words, is that going to have a planetary effect in spite of what the scientists are telling you? Well, my simple 8th grade physics tells me, yeah, probably.
Yeah,
maybe, probably.
Yes.
So the deeper layer that is possible with these computer algorithms is, let's say you snuck in a few secret algorithms that the public committees of scientists don't know about, that are pulling different kinds of data altogether from those experiments.
And filtering them to a different location.
Filtering them to secret committees for examination. And that also, if you admit the possibility that this could be a hyperdimensional machine, number one, per Crone. If you admit the possibility that these magnetic fields are several times the strength of the local magnetic field of the Earth, then the possibility arises that you could set up resonance effects in the planet itself or in the planet's magnetosphere whenever that dang thing is turned on. So if you suspect that that might happen, are you going to put in algorithms to filter and do what I call data correlation experiments to see what happens in the aggregate system at large whenever the machine is turned on? And would part of that data filtration experiment include changes in human or animal behavior because of variations in the local magnetic field? Well, of course it would. So in other words, I think there's several possible layers of hidden experiment going on with this machine on the basis of the fact that it is a hyperdimensional machine if you follow the theories of Gabriel Krohn.
And oddly enough,
I would point out, ended up as chief research engineer for General Electric.
oh yeah, right. And oddly enough, this goes back to the Nazis again, because weren't they the ones who started the cyclotron experiments? And aren't in Germany, are they not the largest financial contributor to CERN?
Germany is the largest financial contributor to CERN. Germany is the largest financial contributor to Europe's version of HARP in Norway. So in other words, it's not for nothing that Angela Merkel is Chancellor of Germany, because what's her PhD in? Well, her PhD just happens to be in an interesting field called quantum chemistry. So,
oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, we've got a nuclear physicist as the Chancellor of Germany.
And speaking of Norway's HARP experiments, I'm holding in my hand I think this is your most recent book, Hidden Finance, Road Networks, and Secret Sorcery.
Right.
Is that your most recent work here?
Yes, it is.
On the cover of this book here, and I'll just hold it up. Is that not the Norway spiral we saw when Obama visited Norway? Is that what that is?
That is the Norway spiral. And as Richard Hoagland pointed out, the Russians were doing an ICBM missile test in the Arctic when that spiral occurred. And gee golly, the Russian missile test failed. It went off kind of crazy haywire like a bottle rocket. And there were if you dig in the story back then, there were little accusations, let's say, hurling back and forth. And then a few weeks after that, Angela Merkel told the United States, we don't need your missile defense system.
Oh boy! Wow.
Wow.
And
so did Obama go to get a demonstration? Is that what you think?
I don't know. I don't know. It could be. I don't know. But let's remember that when the Soviet Union was in the process of collapsing, there were a number of earthquakes in the Soviet Union, big ones, located in Georgia, which is where the then Soviet Foreign Minister Edvard Shevardnadze hailed from. And, I just thought, gee, isn't that interesting? Soviet Union has massive earthquakes. German reunification is underway. And, to me, it's just a little suspicious.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. In your book, The Third Way, I'm sorry, Amy, were you going to say something?
No, I just was agreeing.
Okay. All right, now I want to jump backwards again. In your book, The Third Way, you speak about the Rapallo principle, or the Rapallo principle, right, which was Germany's or the Nazis' plan to subvert the Morgenthau plan to deindustrialize, where they were creating industrial plants in the.
Well, you're confusing two things. I know what you're talking about. The Rapallo principle is what I call the secret provisions, and this was not the Nazis that did this. The Rapallo Treaty was signed in 1922 between Germany and the Soviet Union. And in the treaty, Hans von Seeckt, the chief of the German General Staff, wanted a secret codicil put into that treaty. And the secret codicil was that Germany would, in return for building big industrial plant inside of the Soviet Union, that Germany in turn would have access to all of the weapons that they were forbidden under the Treaty of Versailles to train with. So in other words, the Germans were training with tanks and dive bombers and aircraft and heavy artillery inside the Soviet Union, away from the prying eyes of the Allied attaches that were going around to make sure that Germany was keeping the treaty. So in other words, Germany was already rearming long before Hitler. That's the Rapallo principle. Now, what I say in the book is that template becomes the very same template used after World War II by the post-war West German government when it farms out all of its highly classified defense projects in corporations outside of German soil. So in other words, let's put it this way, by the late 1960s, most people don't know this, but by the late 1960s, because of this policy and other things, the Germans have closed the entire nuclear fuel cycle. In other words, Germany, like Japan right now, could become a nuclear power in 4 weeks if they wanted to. And I'm not talking A bombs here, folks. I'm talking hydrogen bombs. And the Russians consistently, particularly under Gorbachev, were trying to sound the alarm bell that the Germans, by doing their rearmament on foreign soil and through corporate cutouts and so on, were becoming a major military power. And they even published and I mentioned this in the third way as well, Aaron, they even published a global strategic research.org published in, I think, 2009, 2010, a short article on the fact that the French had just tested their most recent submarine launched ballistic missile, which was built by the Germans, and which, incidentally, the Germans are building the 200 to 300 kiloton hydrogen bomb warheads for the missile for the French. So that Global Strategic Research is a Russian-sponsored, Russian-connected organization. So in other words, the Russians are saying, "Hey guys, the Germans have, done it again. They're a thermonuclear power, and they're just not telling everybody."
Right.
So,
right. It certainly is a story of strange bedfellows.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
And in fact, it reminds me of the Lend-Lease program where
Yep.
we were funneling uranium to Russia secretly, and then we were telling everybody in public that we just didn't have enough. And then who was it? Was it Bormann who snuck out of Germany with the submarine of 80 canisters of yellow cake?
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden we had all the uranium we needed. And
yeah, that's a story that I go into in great detail in the Nazi International, how American, actually I begin the story all the way back with Reich of the Black Sun, when I examine the evidence that the German A-bomb program was actually successful and actually probably tested an A-bomb months before we did at the end of the war. I think the evidence now is almost compelling that this is the case, and that we've been sold yet another big whopping lie. And again, I never bought it. I always had trouble with that whole story, even as a kid, Aaron, because Germany basically invented nuclear physics, and all of a sudden, during the war, they're suffering this mass scientific dyslexia, and they can't get anything to work,
Right.
That story just never made much sense to me. So, but the interesting thing is that after German reunification, a bunch of documents began to be declassified in the United States, and they're stunning when you sit down and read them, because you're reading descriptions of A-bomb tests going on inside of Nazi Germany. I mean, there's no other way to read them. And, we get all these documents being declassified in the final days of the Bush administration. And I think the reason why was with German reunification, all of those underground installations in Eastern Germany, in the Soviet zone, were now open to the public. And they knew the Germans would go in there and start putting the story back together, which is exactly what they did. So, yeah, you have... in my opinion, you have Martin Bormann making a deal with the United States, very secretly, of course, and the U-boat in question is the U-234. It gets a bit confusing. U-234 carrying U-235.
U-235, right.
So you've got the U-boat U-234 with 2 Japanese officers and these gold cylinders, and the Japanese officers were seen by the German crew painting labels on these cylinders that said U-235. And to me, that's another dead giveaway that we're dealing with a very sophisticated nuclear weapons program, because why would you need gold cylinders? And the answer is very simple. If you have highly enriched uranium, you don't put it in lead. And the reason why is that lead and uranium is a very corrosive mixture, and it will taint the supply of the uranium. Gold, however, does not react to uranium. It can still shield like lead, but at the same time it preserves, it's inert, and it preserves the purity of the uranium. And that's an indicator that that uranium was in a highly enriched form. Okay, and that's the key.
That's astonishing.
Yep.
And wasn't it IG Farben?
Yep.
That was the plant literally yes. That was just outside of the concentration camp Auschwitz, in the town of Auschwitz.
All right, I detail that whole story.
I want you to tell that story before we close the last hour out here.
I detail that story in the book Reich of the Black Sun that kicks off the whole Nazi series. IG Farben built. The story is that IG Farben built an enormous synthetic rubber, a Buna plant at Auschwitz, and funded it themselves to the tune of 900 million Reichsmarks. In other words, about $2 billion. Okay, an enormous,
wow.
Enormous.
More than you need to make synthetic rubber.
Yeah, and here's the real clinker.
They didn't make any rubber.
They didn't make any rubber. You know, the story was the whole plant was a big, huge failure. Now, folks, IG Farben held the patent on synthetic rubber. They swapped it for Standard Oil's synthetic gasoline patent, okay? So in other words, IG Farben, we're talking about the most sophisticated chemicals company in the world, all right, that can't make an ounce of synthetic rubber for 900 million Reichsmarks and 4 years of operation, okay? So there's a little problem with this story. And the other problem with the story is this plant is so huge that it's using more electricity on a day-to-day basis than the entire city of Berlin. So, you know, this is a huge failure, folks. Well, obviously, I think we're dealing with a cover story. Right. And if you look at the cover story very carefully, you would need that amount of electricity if you have a big, huge Oak Ridge, Tennessee-sized uranium isotope enrichment plant, okay? On top of this, at the farm hall transcripts, where the German scientists, nuclear scientists, were taken to Great Britain and their conversations were secretly recorded by British intelligence. If you look at the farm hall transcripts, a German physicist, a nuclear chemist by the name of Paul Hartek, as the Germans are sitting around debating how did the Allies get the atomic bomb, you know, well, they had lots of labor. And Hartek interrupts at that point in the conversation, and he said, you don't need 10,000 men for that. You only need 10. Wow. I was amazed at what I saw at IG, meaning IG Farben. So in other words, he's describing a nuclear enrichment process that only required 10 people to run. And I'm thinking,
Germans are efficient.
Well, no, it's got nothing to do with efficiency. It's got everything to do with a way of enriching isotope that gives you extremely high purity of the enriched isotope, and that would have been within the realm of science possible back then, because one of the key problems that scientists have to explain, and they will admit it if you press them on it, is why did it take so dang long to invent the laser? The science for it was available in the 1930s. And the way of enriching isotopes that I'm talking about is laser isotope enrichment. A chemical laser, what's IG Farben's specialty?
Chemicals.
A chemical laser that you can tune within a few angstroms to be resonant to the specific isotope that you want to extract, and you create a free electron chemical tunable laser. All right, you charge the laser and you shoot the laser between two electrical plates through the isotope that you want, and you gather all the isotope that you want on one of those electrical plates. Would that be a reason for so much electricity, for IG Farben's involvement, for its own statements that it ran into constant difficulties at this plant. Well, yeah, because with a tunable laser, what you have to do is you have to find the resonant frequency of the isotope you want to enrich. So you have to do it really literally by blunt trial and error method back then. Now, the other problem that we have with the German nuclear program, and again, the Allied legend does not deal adequately with this. By the end of the war, over 600 tons, T with a T, tons of enriched isotope in the Nazi stockpile goes completely missing. In other words, they were enriching isotopes on an enormous scale that dwarfs anything we were doing in this country.
Seriously.
And doing it with a variety of technologies, including cyclotrons, just like we were doing over here. You know, they had all of these technologies, and they were probably using them to create the feedstock for their isotope enrichment programs, the last stage of which I think was probably this chemical laser isotope enrichment to create the final needed purity in the feedstock. So they had enormous resources, and let's not forget something else. Since the IG Farben plant, the so-called synthetic rubber plant, was located at Auschwitz, what are they doing? Well, number one, they're using the inmates of the camp as human shields to preserve it from Allied and Soviet bombing, number one. And number two, they don't have to be as concerned as we do in our program of having to protect the laborers in the equipment. You know, they've got an endless supply of cannon fodder that, you know, they can expose to all sorts of radiation, and when they get sick and die, just bring in another few thousand. So in other words, the program that they were running was absolutely gigantic, huge. And I think this is the reason that people say that Adolf Hitler was nuts when he declared war on the United States, as his armies are freezing to death outside of Moscow. What they're forgetting is that Adolf Hitler knows things and knows what they're up to.
Yes.
And, you know, he's taking the gamble. We're going to get there before, you know, those people over there are going to get there. So, you know, that's, I think, the hidden reason why he goes ahead and declares war on the United States. You know, we've been fighting an off-the-books war for months anyway. So, you know, he just swallowed the pill. So there's a lot about the German nuclear program that, you know, since the German reunification and the declassification of Allied secret documents since then, that put a very, very different light on World War II, on the atomic bomb, and all of that. A whole different story.
Wow, amazing. Wow, Joseph, you tell one hell of a tall tale, sir.
Well, I hope it's not a tall tale.
Well, listen, are you guys keeping an eye on the chat? Are there any questions? Do we have any listeners, viewers who have questions?
No.
No, we don't have a whole lot of time left, so just in case there is, I just want to make sure that at least to give an opportunity.
That's a bad sign. Your listeners are bored to tears.
Well, they're just trying to wrap their head around everything. I mean, it's a lot, right?
I think everybody's busy picking their jaw off the floor.
Well, again,
I asked the chat, did you follow all that? And they're like, somewhat, kind of, yeah.
Well, again, folks, it's important for folks to understand, and I'm not trying to sell a book here. I make most of my income off my website, not my books. But, you know, I have several books, and it's important for people to realize that the reason that there are so many books about this whole topic is that it is a very long story to tell, and that the devil is in the details. The devil is in the footnotes. I think once people actually start reading those books and understand the amount of research that's gone into this tall tale that I'm telling, they'll come away thinking that, you know, there's a lot more here than meets the eye. That we've basically been told a lot of lies since World War II.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. We have one question from one of our regular listeners, Omaha Ben. He wants to know what's with the Sphinx.
Well, the Sphinx is interesting because for several reasons. Dr. Robert Schoch, following a tip of John Anthony West, went to the Sphinx and examined the water erosion patterns on the Sphinx and concluded that that structure, that monument, had to be at least 8,000 to 10,000 years old, because the last big rainy period in Egypt dates to that era. So it's much older than standard Egyptology will allow, and of course it occurs in a context and with methods of construction that are linked to the Valley temples and to the two big pyramids there at Giza, so that redates them as well. The other interesting thing about the Sphinx is many years ago on television there was a special program called The Mystery of the Sphinx. They talk about Dr. Schock and his work, that was narrated by Charlton Heston, a very good documentary. And they also, it's a very good documentary. They also point out that the head on the Sphinx is far too small for the scale of the structure, and that it appears that the head had been recarved at some later date. So in other words, the head on it is certainly Egyptian, but the actual monument itself is not Egyptian in any way.
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, because that's a no-brainer because the head is almost in pristine condition while everything around it, including the body and the walls, are completely eroded. So that's
I
remember the head had just fell off to begin with, and they replaced the whole head. There was another rumor of that too.
No,
that could be too.
I heard that they took a lion's head and carved it down, but of course that's just what I've heard. I don't know that there's any evidence specifically, but that would make sense.
Some people think it was a lion. Some people think it was a dog's head, the Egyptian god Anubis, right?
Well, I think the reason that a lot of the people are going for the lion's head is because, like 13,000 years ago,
right? It's aligned with Leo.
It's aligned with Leo, precisely.
Right.
Are you familiar with Dr. Michael Cremo's work?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I've read one or two of his books, and the Forbidden Archaeology, where he discusses that they have coal deposits where they find human artifacts and modern Homo sapiens skeletons with tools and artifacts dating back to as far, get this now, 2.3 billion years old.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with their work. I mention it in my book, The Cosmic War, because in that book I came to the conclusion that if there was an interplanetary war fought in our solar system, it probably occurred around 3.2 million years ago. So yeah, I refer to their work a lot, just simply to get people out of the idea that the academic narrative of modern Homo sapiens arising about 200,000 years ago may not be entirely true.
No, it's absolutely not.
Well, genetically, the problem, no, you can't say it's absolutely not. Genetically, it is true that modern Homo sapiens arises about 200,000 years ago. The problem is that they're only looking at one part of the story. The other part of the story is all of those ancient texts, including the Old Testament, that suggests that there's some sort of genetic engineering program going on back then. So, we may have genetic cousins out there that left all of these artifacts. So,
right.
The story I'm trying to tell is huge. The reason I write so many books is it's taken that many books to tell the story, and number two, no one wants to go out and buy a 10,000-page book.
Well, I got to tell you, after reading your book, The Third Way, and I'm a fairly prolific reader. I do quite a bit of reading. This book has no fluff. It is nothing but pure jaw-dropping information with loads of footnotes. So if you want a book, and I don't want to belittle Michael Cremo, but I was a little disappointed. His book has got quite a bit of fluff in it. He talks about his, getting to the hotel and driving from here to there, and what he had for lunch, and just tons of fluff, and somewhat disappointing. Now it's peppered with some phenomenal information, but the book itself is largely fluff. This book is absolutely not one drop of fluff, and I'm super impressed with this book, and I can't wait to get into the other two that I've ordered, and I will be ordering more. I will go back and I will go check out some of your previous books, The Nazi International, The Rise of the Black Sun, and I can't thank you enough for your time.
Well, thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed it, guys. Thank you for having me on.
Let us know. your website is Giza Death Star?
Right, and they can get the books on the web store at Giza Death Star. They will come from Amazon, but I get a few extra pennies if you order off my website.
Right, I put the link in the chat, in the main chat for his website, gizadeathstar.com. And it gives you a nice little list of the books. You can click on each and get a good overview of each of them. So
thank you.
I just wanted to thank you again for joining us this week. It's been very, very educational and mind-bending, to say the least. So
my pleasure. My pleasure, guys.
Real education.
Hopefully you can come back again and we can narrow in on some of these topics and, you know, delve into them a little bit more, right? We kind of went all over the map tonight, so.
Yeah, I'm certainly hoping we can do this again.
But we can all come out of this knowing that, you know, there is a link between the Nazis and all of the world things that are happening right now, as well as, you know, throughout the 19th century, right? So, 20th century as well. So.
Yep.
Well, Dr. Farrell, thank you again, and it's been an absolute pleasure. I absolutely cannot wait to get you back to go a little bit deeper. We'll try not to be all over the place. We'll try to narrow it down and go a little deeper into one or two subjects. And at your earliest convenience, I absolutely cannot wait to speak to you again, and I just can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you for having me on, guys.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and play our little outro here, and you feel free to hang up. We are going to hang around a few minutes and talk to our viewers.
I'll probably hang around for a few minutes and then click out.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and hit our outro, and then we'll just go do a few minutes of overtime, all right? And I almost had it ready. All right, there's our fantastic outro that doesn't seem to work very good when we start the show. All right, so we have you. Dr. Farrell is still with us for a few minutes. I'm going to go over to the chat box and see if anybody has anything to say. And once again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Let's see here. What am I doing? Where did my chat box go? There it is.
Chuck says, thanks, Dr. Farrell, for coming on the show.
Not a problem.
Well, Zach, I hope you were listening. I played some of your music during our breaks. I wasn't watching the chat box, buddy. I had 10 pages worth of notes I was trying to focus on and keep my brain on the conversation. Omaha Ben is with us. I want to thank everybody for their contributions. Omaha Ben, Juxtapose. We had Trinidadi Landis, who actually left me a message earlier that they were very anxious about the show. Franco is usually with us. Thanks, Franco, for being here. Gandalf the White made an appearance. Hey, Gandalf. Zach Hawkins, he's my buddy who actually lives around the corner, who I have yet to meet. Who else was here? I'm just scanning through. Jimmy Schiff made an appearance.
Yeah, we haven't seen him in a long time.
No. We need to get him in a chat one of these days. I thought he took a hiatus.
Yeah, he did for a while, yeah. Haven't seen him for a long time.
All right, well, we still got 10 people watching. If you guys got any questions, if you have any comments for our guest, put them out now. I can't tell you how much longer Joseph's going to be around.
Probably about 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
I have a question, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly.
Have you heard of subquantum kinetics?
Yes, Dr. Paul Laviolette. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. I was just curious what your thoughts on his work were.
I like Dr. Laviolette's work for a lot of reasons. Number one, particularly in subquantum kinetics, because he's pointing out that there is no such thing as a closed physical system. All physical systems are open.
Right.
And once you admit that possibility, then you're admitting the possibility of systems that have a coefficient of performance that's over unity. Now notice I said coefficient of performance that's over unity and not simply over unity. They're two very different things. But that's number one. Number two, I actually spoke with Dr. Laviolette in 2015 at the Secret Space Program conference in Bastrop, Texas. And we had the opportunity actually to talk a bit. But he has also published another very, very important work that kind of is a, if you look at it carefully and compare it to subquantum kinetics, it's a book that's based on that type of thinking, and that's a book called The Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion, an excellent book.
I have that book, and in fact, I've read it about 6 times.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wonderful book. I even have it up in my bookstore.
Awesome.
I don't have books by very many people in my bookstore, so if it's there, it's recommended. That is a superb book, and he is a first-class thinker, and that's why I like his work. He's willing to examine very, very avant-garde notions. One of the other things that he stresses in subquantum kinetics is the idea of self-organizing systems. And he's not afraid to address it in a cosmological scale. So that's the other big plus in that book. So yeah, I do like his work very much.
Okay, I was just curious because I know that from his perspective, he's sort of brought things back to a Euclidean perspective, as opposed to the warped time and space and all of that stuff.
Well, even there, you simply cannot escape the requirements of mathematics, that some of these things just have to be put in a higher dimensional form in order for them to work. This is also very clear from Gabriel Krone's work. And when you're dealing with those unified field theories, it's very important to remember that you are dealing with more than 3 spatial dimensions. So yeah, you can do a Euclidean approach, but I still think that by the nature of the case, you're forced back onto those higher dimensional mathematical languages.
No, I'm not saying that necessarily there isn't any higher dimensional. I'm just saying that you no longer have to have your curvature of space-time involved.
Right.
As you do in the Einsteinian perspective, which...
Well, there's a whole area of physics that lies outside the general relativity paradigm. If you go back to 1903, the famous British physicist E.T. Whittaker published a paper in Mathematische Annalen that basically it's a breathtaking paper, but you can do this kind of higher dimensional stuff, and it's a paper that incidentally will work in quantum mechanics. In other words, what he's talking about can be made to be condign to some of the findings of quantum mechanics. So what we're dealing with, what I'm getting at here, is that we're dealing with the probable existence of an alternative physics. The difficulty is finding exactly what is the theoretical model that makes that physics work. And Dr. Laviolette is approaching things from the standpoint of systems kinetics. On the other hand, if you're Gabriel Krone, you're approaching things from the standpoint of a higher dimensional mathematics that can unify the geometries of electromagnetism, which is kind of a donut geometry, with Einstein's space work, curvature of space geometry.
And that's tensor calculus, yes?
Yes, tensor calculus is just simply a mathematical language. It takes off from linear algebra. So if you're familiar with matrix algebra, tensor calculus basically will take each of the entries in a matrix, and a whole equation can form one entry in that matrix. Follow me? So in other words, it's not just a coordinate system. You can have a matrix dealing with whole equations and using the tensor calculus to rotate from one arrangement of equations to another.
Got it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. See, I never got into calculus. When I was
tensor calculus is very different from calculus per se.
I did get into trigonometry. I thought for a while when I was a young man in school that I wanted to be an electrical engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a lot of electronics classes, and we had to learn a little bit of higher math, and we got into trigonometry, and I never went any further than that, but never got into the calculus end.
If you want a basic kind of popular explanation of how tensor calculus works, I kind of talk about it very briefly in the first chapter of Secrets of the Unified Field, so that you can actually see what's going on when these scientists are coming out with their unified field theories, what tensor calculus actually does. Basically, tensor calculus maps from one coordinate system to another. And the basis of it is usually those mappings are from a system to another system that's been rotated. So in other words, if you take a soda can and put a lattice work, a regular grid work of coordinates on the surface of the can, and then twist the can in your hands like you're wringing a dish rag.
Sure.
Right.
What tensor calculus does is it takes the original layout of the grid that you've put on your can and shows you where those points are now going to be located when you do that rotation.
Okay.
Okay, that's what it does. So it's a mapping. It's a mapping.
So it's a torsion. It's a
torsion.
Mathematical explanation of torsion.
Yes, exactly.
Which what you would need if you had counter-rotating magnetic fields.
Precisely.
Wow,
Yep.
interesting. Hey, listen, we got two questions in the chat box right now from Gandalf the White. We have he wants to know if you think Göbekli Tepe was built at the same time as the original Sphinx.
Well, all the indications are that site is very, very old, and I would not be a bit surprised that they're going right now. I think the dating of Göbekli Tepe is around 4 to 5. Is it around 12? Well, then that would definitely put it in the same time frame as the Sphinx. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Got another question from our pal Zach, whose music I played. He wants to know have you found any evidence that EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies, or sound has been used as weapons or tools in the ancient past?
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. The Egyptian legends tell of the priests levitating stones with sounds. That's very similar to Tibetan legends of monks, singing and chanting and using instruments to move and levitate large rocks.
You know who Edward Lead Scow?
I was just going to say.
Yes.
That pretty much tells the whole story right in itself, does it not?
Yeah.
All you have to do is just look up that guy and what he did.
Yeah, and he claims he was using magnetic principles that were
rotating magnets
that were known to the ancients. And
he wrote a book called Rotating Magnets.
Right. So again, you have the same idea.
Using the flywheel, which is right in the middle in the pool, it shows the flywheel itself. It's shaped kind of like again a Star of David, right?
You have
and the certain points on the flywheel are the points that coincide. And he digs into the earth, collects an electro current and an electromagnetic energy from the ley lines above where he's situated at certain times of the year, and it's got to be a certain time.
See, all that reminds me of cymatics, because what we're talking about is a geometry that exists within electromagnetism.
Yeah,
changing the physical state of the matter through sound vibration and electromagnetic frequency.
Right. What you're doing is you're cohering a lattice structure in the object. Is what you're doing. In other words, you're in
cut
effect
it like butter. Like
you're
The physical.
You're magnetizing it. And the other thing that you mentioned ley lines. The so-called world grid system. I did a whole book on that.
Yeah, it's debatable.
No, I don't think so, because what they're really talking about, if you get behind all the new age fluff and bother, and just look at it from a simple physics point of view, if you have several standing waves in the Earth that have originated from different nodal points on the Earth, what that's going to do is it's going to set up an interference pattern on the surface of the Earth at certain nodes where all the vectors of force zero sum.
Yep.
So in other words, you've created a situation where there's no translation vector, but there is still stress in the medium at that point. That's a scalar stress, all right, because it's not a vector transmission. So I think there's a physics behind this grid system that they knew and that they were exploiting, because
pyramids were built that way.
Yeah, exactly. And that once you get to the idea of scalar stress, then you're square back to James Clerk Maxwell and the way he originally formulated his theory, his equations of electromagnetism, because what you learn as Maxwell's equations now in physics is not his equations.
Right.
They're edited equations that Oliver Heaviside did when he took them out of the mathematical language that Maxwell put them in and put them in a linear algebra partial differential form. Okay.
Wow.
In Maxwell,
Yep.
Maxwell was using a mathematical language called quaternions, and in quaternions, you're dealing not only with vector translations, in other words, a movement from point A to point B, you're also dealing with zero-sum vector systems where there's a magnitude of force at a particular location, but no movement.
Right.
So
right.
it's an infolded potential, okay? So if you have standing waves in the Earth that are canceling at certain nodes on the planetary surface where you have zero-sum vectors, you've still got a magnitude of significant force there. The problem is, how do you access it? Well, again, it's stress, not motion. It's a stress in the medium, okay?
So would that come back to what I was saying about how it's at a certain time of the year?
Yes.
That's a...
Bingo.
Has to be
because you talk about the Castle Bravo nuclear test.
Precisely.
This is the best thing ever.
Wow,
precisely.
That's so awesome.
Because if, again, I'm speculating. Please understand, folks, I'm not a scientist. I'm a hack from South Dakota, all right? But, to my hack from South Dakota thinking here, if you take La Violette's idea that all physical systems are open systems, then a nuclear weapon is an open system when it's detonated, and therefore it's going to gate energy into the reaction from these stresses in the medium. So the yield is going to vary according to time and place.
So depending on in this case is the lattice of the universe, right? The structure or the cellular structure?
The medium is precisely the local field geometry of celestial space, and that includes where and when on planet Earth you detonate it. So this, to me, is the reason why you have recent nuclear powers continuing to test their bombs, because when they fire them off, they suddenly realize, hey, this yield is not predicting or falling within our predicted margins of error.
So then they have to figure out where they are on Earth and where the planets and the moon is and where the sun is, and then try to figure out how to manipulate that.
Right. Now, it's interesting that in the Soviet Union, there was a very famous astrophysicist, well known, he's not considered a fringe scientist by any stretch of the imagination, by the name of Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev. And he was fascinated with the energy of stars, and he came to the realization that stars are putting out more energy than thermonuclear chemistry will allow them to put out. So there's another energy source that's gating energy into the thermonuclear reaction. And what happened in the Soviet Union was he was roundly denounced. I talk about him in my book, The Philosopher's Stone. He was roundly denounced for being a quack, a nut, in Pravda. But in reality, what happened was
a job, right?
They shuffled him off into Soviet Black Projects research is what they did. you
and
know.
then all the science jargon and literature comes to a halt because everyone thinks that that's quack science. Nobody looks at it anymore.
Right.
Yeah, there's no funding for it because they don't want you to know anyways, right?
Now, the thing about the Castle Bravo test, since you brought that up, this ties into the story that I tell in the Nazi International, and again revisited in Grid of the Gods, because down in Argentina there was a Nazi scientist doing fusion experiments for Juan Perón. His name was Dr. Ronald Richter. All right, and Perón gave a press conference in 1951, introduced this Nazi scientist, and told the world press that Argentina has just solved the problem of the hydrogen bomb, and we hadn't even exploded our first one yet, okay? So here's Juan Perón telling the world, this guy has solved the secret of the hydrogen bomb, and he introduces Richter, and Richter proceeds to tell people, yes, I'm getting fusion reactions at such and such temperatures using a mixture of boron and lithium-7, okay? And the world press denounces Richter's claims. Again, he's a fraud, he's a mountebank, he's a swindler, he's a kook, doesn't know what he's talking about.
So like Gabriel Crone, he could bring it down to the laboratory bench. He could do cold fusion.
Let me tell the story here, because the devil's in the details. So Juan Perón, noticing this reaction of the world press, appoints a commission to examine just exactly what he's spending all the money on. Is he being swindled? And he contacts his good friend, Prince Bernard, who sends a Dutch scientist, a Dutch nuclear physicist, and he contacts one of his own Argentine nuclear physicists that's studying in England, gets him all the way back to Argentina. His name is Dr. Jose Balcero, okay? Balcero goes in, looks at Richter's experiments, and Richter starts acting like a complete nut. He doesn't turn on his radioactive detection equipment. He doesn't put it behind the shielding. He does stuff that a junior high school physics student would know to do, okay? And Balcero looks at this and examines all this, and he says, okay, yeah, lithium-7, you're getting these reactions, but you can't be getting these reactions because they're occurring at temperatures far too low for thermonuclear fusion to occur. Now, why am I bothering you with that? Because when Castle Bravo is fired off by the United States with a predicted yield of between 5 and 8 megatons, and it runs away to 15 megatons. In other words, double the yield here, folks. This is a major whoops.
Yeah.
American scientists said, well, we didn't realize that lithium-7, the mixture of lithium-7 and the lithium deuteride would enter the chain reaction. That's their explanation. Where 9 months previously in a press conference, you have a Nazi scientist saying, yes, it does. And you have an Argentine scientist say, yeah, sure it does, but you're doing it at temperatures far too low. So what now happens is that the United States Air Force secretly sent a team after Castle Bravo down to Argentina to interview Dr. Richter and find out, hey, what does this guy know that we didn't? And Richter tells them, it's right there in his declassified paperclip file. I put it in the book. He tells them, oh, well, you see, I happen to think, because I observed these reactions in 1936 in Nazi Germany, I happen to think that plasmas, nuclear plasmas, under electromagnetic stress, because Richter tells you that he's rotating his plasmas at the Lamore precession frequency, and on top of that, pulsing them with gobs of direct current electricity. What does that sound like? And he tells the Air Force, okay, I'm getting these reactions, and I'm getting them because I think nuclear plasmas under electromagnetic stress and rotation gate the cellular structure of local space and create for a brief moment a transduction phenomenon with the 0-point energy. And he uses that phrase right there
awesome.
in the Air Force.
First time in history, right?
And that's the first time in history you see that phrase being used, okay? So the reaction of the Air Force and American scientists looking at this Nazi is just bizarre, because on the one hand, they say, yeah, it's theoretically possible. Number two, he's a fraud, mountebank, and swindler. And number three, we better keep a close eye on this guy. So,
Wow.
and one American scientist working for the Department of Energy says this guy is some sort of mad genius. He's working decades in advance of where we are. So, you know, take it for whatever it's worth. But the bottom line is lithium-7 was fully known in the thermonuclear chemistry. So the public explanation of American scientists for Castle Bravo is, in my opinion, just that. It's a cover story, and it makes no sense when you juxtapose it with what's happening.
Sure, but what's the reaction actually? Does it turn into a feedback loop?
Yes, that's my opinion. It turns into a feedback loop, and if you have a technology,
and that's why they're getting the extra yields.
Well, hang on. It's not only that the Castle Bravo
and the nuclear tests.
Hang on. I know the question. It's not only Castle Bravo you've got to look at, it's Castle Coon, because that was a hydrogen bomb, part of the Castle.
Got less.
That
right?
had, yes, it did. It was calculated to 5 and 8 megatons, and it only achieved 900 megatons. And this was a bomb designed by Edward Teller himself.
Okay.
So, in other words, the other part of the problem here that we've got to remember is that during the entire Castle series of tests, what is also happening? They're being observed by gobs of UFOs.
Right.
Okay.
I've heard you tell this story.
Yeah, they're being observed by gobs of UFOs. I talked about this at San Mateo. And if you've got a technology, if you've figured out the relationship between nuclear plasma and zero-point energy under electromagnetic stress, you've got a technology that can either fire those firecrackers off to yields way beyond their calculated.
Does that enable them to go
or
like
way under the let me finish, under the calculated yield, and that means you're dealing with a technology that could potentially render the entire thermonuclear program inert.
Yeah.
But
so that brings around that theory that there's somebody out there that's stopping the nukes from being set off. Right?
Maybe. Who knows?
That stirs my
Maybe.
Well,
Who knows?
I'm just sitting here.
Your point is that a national security problem? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could that be the reason that Dr. Robert Sarbacher told Wilson that the UFO is classified higher than the H-bomb? Yeah. The reason being is because they're hanging around our H-bomb tests, and they're going, the yields are going all over the charts here, folks.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking in terms of, you know, my earlier question about somebody behind all of the stuff that's going on, because, you know, I've been paying a lot of attention to Zachary Hubbard and his gematria work, and I don't know if you even know who he is and what he's doing.
No, but I know what gematria is.
But he is showing that virtually every piece of quote news unquote on the mainstream media seems to be defying probability with its matching up of certain numbers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it appears that somebody out there is scripting things in quite a bit of detail. And if that's the case, then it sure seems that behind this level of, you know, interplay between the agencies and whatnot, we've got going the possibility that there's somebody that's directing it.
Yeah.
That's what, you know, it appears to me that I have to give that the highest probability. Your thoughts?
Yeah. You were laughing there. What was that laugh about?
If there is a link between consciousness and physics,
and I'm convinced there is.
If there is a group multiplier effect, then if you want to run an experiment on the cosmological planetary scale of what manipulations of consciousness can possibly do, what would you do? You would inject memes into the news in order to see if there's a physics consequence to what you've done. You would inject false stories of famous people dying in one region of the world and not another, and see and see if perhaps your parallel universe theory has any sort of credence. And if that's the case, then what you're playing around with is the idea that the physical constants may not be so constant. And guess who formulates some of those theories? A guy by the name of Pascual Jordan, a quantum physicist in Nazi Germany, by the way.
Of course.
Of course. A guy who was so well known in the theoretical physics field that everyone thought he was a shoo-in for the Nobel Prize. But oh, lo and behold, we can't give the Nobel Prize to a Nazi, and an unrepentant one at that. So yeah, would you run big data correlation experiments by manipulating news in
Now,
that fashion?
I've heard you talk about data correlation experiments in that way on other interviews, but for some reason it just clicked with me. You said something about, you went a little further this time, and regarding injecting memes into the news.
I've mentioned this many times in my vid chats for my members of my website. It's something we talk about a lot. So I've thought about it for a long time.
You just totally blew my mind. And I mean, I have listened to so many of your interviews, and in some cases I've listened to them 2, 3, 4 times. And I'm talking 2 and 3 hour interviews, because that's what I do. I just have all day long to do that, whether I'm home or whether I'm working or whether I'm driving. So that's all I do all day long, is listen to interviews. And since we've had you scheduled, that's pretty much all I've done, is listen to your interviews. And you just put that in a way this time that you've not put in other interviews, and you just totally blew my mind. And I get it. I get it on a level that I struggled, because I've heard you talk about this data correlation experiments, and I've always really wondered what exactly kind of data correlation, and that right there just brought it home.
They're playing around with cosmological things, and they're doing it in a very careful, in my opinion, it's pure speculation, they're doing it in a very cautious, deliberate sort of way.
They're tinkering with consciousness. They're tinkering with mass consciousness in a way that is way beyond.
Well, wait till you read the 9/11 book.
KGB mind control and the MK Ultra. They're tinkering with mass consciousness.
Yes.
In a covert way beyond.
Yes.
Just convincing the masses to believe in the system and vote for Republican or Democrat. Way beyond that.
Way beyond.
Way beyond that. Yeah.
Way beyond that. Yes.
Right down to the atoms, right? Yeah.
Yep. All right. Let me get your thoughts. There's a character out there by the name of Santos Bonacci, and he speaks of the Egyptian lore regarding there's some text that they believed that I guess there was a saying that all is atom, as in, and this guy Santos, he correlates that with not only the atom as in molecules and particles and atoms, but also the original biblical Adam as being the first. Thoughts or knowledge on that subject?
Not directly to that, but I will tell you that all of my books are deliberately written in a certain order, and they all deliberately dovetail with each other. You can read them in any order you wish, but they're all talking about the same thing when you really get into them. Underlying, and you'll encounter this specifically in Giza Death Star Destroyed. You'll encounter it again in The Philosopher's Stone. You'll encounter it again in The Grid of the Gods. Underlying systems of philosophical metaphysics, underlying most classical theological systems, you will find a triadic structure, not a binary structure, a triadic one. In other words, it's an asymmetrical universe. Dovetails very nicely with quantum mechanics.
Wow. Ian, haven't I said that already?
Yep.
I said that a long time ago. I thought that I used the word triunity.
Yeah.
Well, it can be formally mathematically specified, all right? And when you encounter it in those books, I refer to it as the topological metaphor of the medium, because you can describe that structure using a kind of a topology to illustrate what's going on. So that once you clue into that, then you can take all of those terms of philosophical metaphysics and so on and so forth and throw them right out the window and deal with the mathematical form itself. As a result of that, one of the things that emerges is that every system is open to every other system, because the mathematical description of each one will inevitably include the very first starting point from which the whole system begins. And that allows you to rationalize on a formally explicit basis why you have so many ancient cultures that practice synthetic magic. Another word for synthetic or magic is simply analogy, because in the mathematical description of any system, there is the presence of something that underlies each system, that carries over from one system to another and allows you to map from one to the other. And that means in turn that the basis of reality, please hear me now, is an analogy, and therefore in consciousness, because that's how we think. So there is at a very deep level, there is a topological mathematical connection between mind, which is not material, and matter. And in fact, matter increasingly, especially if you look at certain papers in physics lately, matter is increasingly understood to be a field of information. Okay? Once you get to that point, then yes, you can say we can twist that magic and use it for social engineering purposes, for injecting memes, for playing with cosmological consequences of changes in mass consciousness.
Like the JFK assassination.
Like 9/11.
Yes,
Like JFK.
Sandy Hook.
That too. That
Yep.
too.
Now,
once you see the structure, once you understand the structure, you can take all those books of magic and throw them out, because now you have the formally explicit basis for them.
Got it.
yeah.
Most people that you will encounter aren't even thinking that way. They've got their gematria, they've got their grimoires, they've got their Wicca, they've got their, this and that and the other magical system, but they're not penetrating to the actual heart of the issue.
Right. Right.
Okay. Are you familiar with Frank Chester?
No.
He is I don't know how old he is. He's probably in his late 60s, early 70s. He's an artist who has created the very first ever symmetrical 7-sided object.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find him all over YouTube, because he's running around giving these presentations. They built they had an architect design a building based on this.
Mm-hmm.
It relates to, it has a direct correlation to the human heart structure, how the muscular structure of the human heart grows, in this toroidal pattern overlapping on both sides that doctors and scientists have yet to explain. And then when he laid out this pattern it's the most amazing presentation. Go look up Frank Chester if you get a minute.
I will do so. What it sounds like he's doing is what Dr. Kozyrev in Russia theorized decades ago. Kozyrev is a fascinating man, and he points out that life structure itself would be different if time were not a force of its own and have a certain structure to it. So it would definitely, I think, play into all of this. If you look at it, the human being is a hyperdimensional being. We're an interface between the material and the non-material worlds. And that in itself can only be described in a higher dimensional type of mathematics. So, you know, what we're on the cusp of is we're on the cusp of recovering a lot of that ancient way of looking at things, which I'm convinced is founded in a very high scientific culture, lost to us, but nonetheless very high.
Well,
Yes, yes.
Yoda says luminous beings are we.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Taylor de Chardin said we are spiritual beings having a human experience.
That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Flesh suits.
Wow. This is the best.
Yeah, get a hold of those books. They will give you a clue as to how I write and why I'm writing in a certain order, because everything is connected in my thinking. They're highly analogical books in themselves. The books themselves are a treatise on how to think this way. And they once you get into them, you'll see what I'm doing. You'll see very easily what I'm doing.
Have you put out any videos at all?
I do in my members area of my website. I do what are called webinars.
Okay.
They're kind of like PowerPoint presentations where I walk you through different topics that interest me. The last one I did was called the Louisiana Labyrinth, all about the Louisiana Purchase and all of the strange stuff around that. But I've done one on the fine structure constant and synchronicity and Wolfgang Pauli and Carl Gustav Jung. I've done one on C.S. Lewis and some of the strange things he wrote. You know, I'm all over the board.
Right.
Jesus, where do you find the time?
I'm constantly working. I'm constantly working. Right now I'm reading about 200 books for the next couple books that I want to write. And then I do my websites and, you know, write my music and so on and so forth. So I'm constantly doing something.
So what's the subject of your next book or two?
I never tell.
Come on.
I never tell
anybody.
No, I never tell. I've learned the hard way.
It'll only go on the internet.
No, I never tell. I never tell. One reason is partly is out of security. You know, I've had a lot of strange things happen to me, and I never. Richard Hoagland told me when I first met him, you know, they would have killed you long ago, but you came out of left field so far and so fast that, you know, there's nothing they can do about it. So I thought, gee, thanks, Richard.
Well, that answers one question that I've been asked, because I've talked to people about you and mentioned your name and recited some of your findings, and I've been asked, well, why isn't this guy dead? And the reason I gave was, well, he might be probably, you know, closer than anybody, or as close as anybody could get, on the outside, that is. But, you know, it's the difference between being John Lennon and having 100 million people at your disposal who are hanging on your every word. I mean, this is a small show, and although we've only got a few viewers right now, in a week or two, you know, this will be seen a couple of thousand times. So you may as well consider yourself speaking to a conference, a large one, and, you know, give it more time, and it'll be that many more views. I'm sure you know how the internet works, but the point is, it's not John Lennon. You're not on the level. You know what I mean? I mean, literally, John Lennon had hundreds of millions of people that would have bowed if he said bow. I mean, if he said we're going this way, that's where they would all go. So I've heard the explanation that first it's a matter of who's listening and who's hearing.
Well, I definitely think they're listening. Like I say, I've had a lot of strange things happen to me. I've had mail opened, phone taps. I've been in interviews where I mention the subject and we go completely dead.
What's the subject?
Yeah, I've had the most recent time that happened to us was on Richard Hoagland's show, and everything. I mean, everything here just shut down. I've had to move several times. I've had to take FBI. Former FBI people with me to certain conferences because of groupies, and And most recently, I've had some very strange contacts that indicate, yeah, they're definitely watching.
Really?
So yeah, so I don't say what I'm going to do.
You had some agent provocateurs at any conferences?
Oh, absolutely. I've had to buy books on Amazon that I'm really not researching in the subject area just to throw people off
Wow.
of what I'm doing, what I'm actually doing. I tell no one. And I've even told my publisher, don't tell anyone what I'm doing until the book is actually in your hands, and then I'll talk about it. So,
Wow.
color me paranoid, but, but that's what I do.
Well, you're in the right place, so we don't mind. I mean, we get it.
Can you see my screen right now, guys?
Yes.
This is on the Masonic Hall in Philadelphia on the wall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this relates right into what you're saying, right? About the
To a certain extent.
Rotating current, right?
To a certain extent. Years ago, one of the strange things that happened to me is I was contacted by someone in Norway, let's just put it that way, emailed me out of the clear blue and said, oh, we've been following your work for some time. We're convinced that you know things that you're not telling, and we know things that we think would be useful to you, but we want to initiate you into our secret society, pay your way over to Norway so that we can do that and talk about all this. And I wrote back to them that there's nothing you can tell me that I don't know. Thanks. It was a fishing expedition. I've had at one conference, I've had a former Air Force Office of Special Investigations, Treasury, FBI guy talk to me all night trying to recruit me. I've had it all. I've seen it all. So
well, that's what happens when you reach that level. I've asked on more than one occasion on this show, I put the question forward, and I think I already know the answer. The question is, where are all the savants? And I know that you're not much of a TV guy, and maybe you've seen the movie or heard about it or familiar with the movie Good Will Hunting.
Yes.
Okay, well, then if you're familiar, I don't need to explain. There don't have to be idiot savants. They don't have to be Rain Man,
right,
autistic savants.
Right.
We have people that are well put together and just freaking off the scale smart. And I've asked on this show, where the hell are these people? Why aren't they out there solving problems for humanity? And the answer is that they get sucked into the system, they get recruited.
Right.
Don't I count, Aaron?
No, sweetheart. I'm afraid not.
I don't know. They tested me out as hyper genius in spatial perception.
Well, that's why you're on our show, honey. Because you keep up with us.
Yeah, they get recruited at a very early age. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Well,
Dr. Farrell, any more questions, you guys? Is anybody in the chat? I haven't been watching the chat box. I'm sorry, guys.
I haven't seen any more questions come up.
Okay.
Well, good enough, guys. I'll call it a night. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, that was 45 minutes of the best overtime ever, Dr. Joseph Farrell. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, guys. Just let me know when you want me back.
Thank you so much. By the way, I sent you a connection request on Skype, and if you feel inclined,
okay,
you'll find me. I'm the only one here with Skype, so that's why
I don't. I'll connect you, but truth be told, I don't often. My Skype is open, but I'm very seldom watching it. The way to get a hold of me is through email.
Okay.
That's the way that everybody has to get a hold of me. I don't give out my phone number for reasons, unless I know people.
Yeah.
I don't like people to know where I'm at, but
yep.
like I say, I've had to move several times. But anyway, that's how to get a hold of me.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks again so much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, guys.
Thank you again. It's
been amazing. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Dudes, unfreaking believable. That was amazing.
Absolutely awesome. It was an utter joy to have him on. Man, I tell you what.
It would be good. It was better than I thought.
It was fantastic. I'm giddy. What can I say?
Wow.
Are we going to be hanging here much
My
longer?
head-
Because I'd like to cruise out to have another fix.
Well, go have a
My head
cigarette.
is
I'm not going to hang around much longer, but I will hang around a few minutes.
Okay. All right. I'll be back.
My head is spinning.
Dude, Ian.
Okay, we should shut down the live.
Yeah, give it just a minute. I want to thank everybody once again. We got a couple of stragglers. We got our good pals, Omaha Ben, Juxtapose are in the chat box. Michael Corbin hung around or showed up, and
Omaha's had some questions.
I'm not seeing any questions, and if there are, what I'm looking for is all capital letters. Jordan Rains, I don't know if he's still here, but he was here not long ago. And before we shut it all down, I really want to just thank everybody for hanging and contributing. Gandalf, Omaha, Jordan, Juxt. We had Zach Hawkins earlier, and I think Bella showed up, and maybe I saw RL. I actually shut my window down by accident and had to come back. There's Franco. So I think I'm missing some of the chat box texts. He insulted Jim Fetzer on our show. Oh, was that Philip Franklin showed up?
No, it was somebody else. They were wondering what happened about Dana W.
Did Dana
And I
W
just
show
said
up?
that no, it just was brought up in the conversation.
Who was the troll? You said something in the private.
Yeah, he had a.
Did you eject somebody?
No, I actually didn't.
Okay. Do you still? Okay.
I'm just going all the way back here. Yeah.
Hey, Free Bethlehem! You changed your icon. I don't recognize you. Mike, we're gonna get you in here, man. Maybe next week, but I want to talk to you again. We're already at almost an hour overtime. We need to shut this down in a minute. It's getting long. But this was one freaking hell of a conversation, man. That was just super awesome. So Mike was listening, but he didn't say anything in the chat. I don't know how long you were hanging around, Mike, but damn, it was a good show. Who else was in the chat?
For a while.
Like I said, I
It was
accidentally.
just no names 000.
Oh.
That's who it was.
Hey,
did they read the chat at all? And then we both said, yeah. I mean,
you know what? Let's do what we did that other time. Since look, I accidentally shut my window down, and when I came back, all the chat conversation was gone. So why don't you do a screen share, and then slowly scroll through the chat so that I can go back and read it later.
All right.
I can pause the video.
You can see this?
Yep. So no name was being the asshole?
Yeah, he was saying some stuff. And we had the end all turned out too bad. But we're still live right now. Right?
Yeah, we need to be live because I want to record that chat. I want to record the chat conversation, and I'll go read it later. Oh, well, Mike, if you were hanging around for about an hour, then you caught pretty much the entire overtime. Shit, Ian, I can't believe the dude hung around for 45 minutes, but we were.
Yeah, extra.
I mean, we were on a roll. That's good stuff. It's hard to stop talking when you're on a good conversation.
I'm glad he went into the ley lines, and that really answered a question that I've had for a long time about why they have to be at the perfect moments in space-time continuum. Why you're able to do things at a certain time, certain year, you know, certain. All kind of hit it home there.
Oh boy. And he might be able to get us, well, he could at least give us a put in a good word for Catherine Austin Fitts. That'd be good. And I told you earlier, I don't really expect.
Yeah, like you said, she's quite the busy lady. She's got lots going on.
Well, even if we did get her, I would only ask for an hour or maybe, you know, a little bit more, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. I wouldn't ask for her to hang around for a whole 3 hours.
We're still live?
Yep.
Yeah, we're going through the chats, so I can go back and read the conversation later. You can scroll a little bit faster, Ian. Just give it about a 1 second and then scroll the whole screen. 1, 2, scroll. 1, 2, scroll, and then I can
Pause it.
Yeah, I'll just pause the video and read when I come back.
Yeah.
Because I'm not reading it right now. I'm finishing the conversation, having a smoke, and we're gonna be out of here in a moment.
Well, I was like, you know, when we went past the, you know, the end of the show and we kept going, and I'm like, I really want to smoke.
Yeah.
But that's all right. You know, I weathered it.
I could talk to that guy all day long.
Oh yeah, I could too.
Oh,
you
apparently
know,
we did. We just
really
did.
Yeah, and he showed up really early too.
He showed up early and he said 10 minutes and he was here for
Yeah.
almost an hour after.
He was here when I got on, and that was like 3:30 something.
I mean, I gave him the link, and he was in within 5 minutes and hung around for 30 minutes before the show.
Yeah, that was nice. That was nice. I was very, very glad to get to ask him about La Violette and all that. And yeah, maybe he can help us get in touch with a couple of these people that I'm not.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, I'm bashing my head trying to get these people. They're not responding.
I forgot to ask him, but I can ask him in an email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About Peter Levenda, because he's friends with Peter Levenda and he references his books many times. They've been to conferences and they talk on the phone. So I'll ask him in an email if he can.
Yeah, let's see.
Put in a good word for Peter Levenda.
So we can go ahead and cut the live feed now.
Catherine Austin Fitts too. He mentioned.
Well, one more time, thanks everybody in the chat box. Thanks for all our viewers. We got 11 people watching right now. You guys
Awesome.
have a drink and a smoke.
See you next week, same time.
We'll see you guys next week.
We don't have a special guest, but we got a lot to talk about. That's for sure.
Well, unless we can wrangle one between now and then, we might. Yeah, we'll be just chatting.
Well, we might just invite one of these regular, visitors.
I want to get Mike in here. I want to talk to Mike. And,
I'd like to do that next week. Get some of the people that watch us on here for their thoughts and stuff.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody.
Love y'all.
Love y'all. Love and peace, everyone. Be good.
Bye, guys.
Did you kill the broadcast?
It's still saying live.
Yeah. The chat box will stay live on the channel.
Yep.
For a few minutes after Ian kills the broadcast. Ian, your mic is muted. Are we still?
I have. No, you're the.
Did you kill the broadcast?
No, you have to do it.
Oh my God. I thought you were hosting.
No, you are.